Okay, then we will move on with our agenda, and at this time, we are open for public comment. We have a very full agenda, therefore public comment will be limited strictly to 5 minutes. Would anybody like to make public comment at this time? Please come forward and give your name.
My name is Sherry Gerby. Many of you know me because Vicki Suter and I used to come regularly and present stigma tips to you. Many of you may already know my story, but because Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse is going to be here tonight, I thought it was very apropos that I come and give you my experience. 10 years ago, I found myself in a very dire situation. I was profoundly depressed, very suicidal, didn't think I had anything to offer the world, therefore had to leave it. I had no idea there was such a thing as public mental health. So I didn't look for help. I didn't know that there was any help out there. But my daughter got concerned because my phone had been cut off. So she found someone that would come and check on me. And they could see I wasn't doing very well. And they knew about Common Ground and took me to Common Ground. CMH then paid for 5 weeks of hospitalization and for me to get back on my medications and to at least have some kind of stability. Even after 5 weeks of hospitalization, I still wasn't in very good shape. I couldn't think for myself. If somebody said, oh, you need to make this phone call, or you need to go do a tour, or I could do that. I could follow people's suggestions, but I couldn't think for myself. There was a social worker at the hospital that had said, I think Clubhouse would be really good for you. Had no idea what that meant, what that entailed. When I got my case manager, I repeated what I had been told. And she, oh, great. And so she made arrangements for me to go to Dreams Unlimited to do a tour. Then I was given paperwork to fill out. Well, I could do that. So I started going to Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse. My initial goal was to go twice a week so that I would be sure to get out of bed, get dressed, and get out of the house, because isolation feeds the depression. So that was my original commitment. I hadn't been there for very long when the staff asked me if I would work with a young lady that was trying to get her GED. And she particularly needed help with her math. And I was good in math. I had 2 degrees, so I think that's why they asked me, is because I had all that education behind me. I didn't know that I'd be any good at it, but I said, I'll give it a try. So before I knew it, more and more people started coming and wanting assistance with reading better, with becoming a citizen of the United States. So I ended up helping anywhere from 25 to 28 people each month. I even set up a spreadsheet so we could track our time, how much time each student was spending in the education room. And I forgot to even tell you that I was there, I'm working, I'm watching Joyce being very busy, pulling stuff into her room and pulling stuff out. I didn't know what she was doing. She was creating space for an education room. So and because she felt that she had a member that could kind of take the ball there, she was making the space for us. And so having that education room, people just started coming. Well, I had to come every day then because I didn't want to disappoint anybody. And all of that was really helpful for me. I learned that I did have value. I learned that I had something to offer the world. I actually was pretty good at that whole tutoring thing, being able to pinpoint what a person's weakness was and what they needed to learn in order to build on it for the next steps. It was wonderful. During my time at Clubhouse, I also took speechcraft and a couple of other classes, things that would happen at the Clubhouse. Well, at speechcraft, I met Sherry Reshman and Vicki Suter. And Vicki's the one that originally offered me a position here at CMH. So I did start working, I think it was 10 hours a week, something like that. That was 6 years ago, so over time, my role has changed and expanded, and I have loved working here. And I have said many times that CMH saved my life because you paid for the hospitalization, medication, got me hooked up with Easter sales, but Clubhouse gave me my recovery. And I am so grateful to them. If I'm having a bad week or feeling a little stressed or something, I can swing by because I'm still an honorary member. And I will touch base with them, either with a phone call, an email, or swinging by, because they're located fairly close to my home. So I'm really happy that they're here doing a presentation, and I just wanted to be able to put a face to someone that was really helped tremendously by the Clubhouse model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to make public comment at this time? If you'd come forward, please, and give us your name.
My name is Ava Lightman, and I'll try to keep. Basically, after years and years of mental illness and finally finding the right medications, Dr. Carlos, who is the director of Hawthorne Center, he managed to hook me up with Chad Witcher for my internship, because I back to school again and again and again, finally did it. So I got my master's in public administration with a core concentration in nonprofit organization and management, which is a mouthful. But I got brought in, started with the recipient rights, advocacy stuff, and once Chad left, I was handed over to Mike Daly, who was just wonderful, and I ended up meeting and getting very friendly with some of his staff, and I just, watched OCHN. I was like, oh, they're going to move to this building, and I think you guys were probably less upset than I was. I was like, the first building was 5 minutes away, and this one I was afraid to get lost with all the loop arounds on Corporate Drive. But I just wanted to say, you guys, great job, and I'm happy to be part of the organization again. And
Yeah, that's very nice. Thanks very much. Would anyone else like to make public comment at this time? Well, we will have an opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting, so we will now move on. At this time, may I have a motion to suspend the rules and approve the agenda?
So moved.
It was moved by Ms. Newman, seconded by Mr. Furman. Okay. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the approval of board minutes for December 19, approval of the CAC minutes of December 20th, and approval of the Oversight Policy Board minutes of January 24th, and finally, approval of the RRAC minutes of December 7th and January 4th. Is there a motion?
Move.
Support.
Moved by Mrs. Summers, seconded by Ms. Newman. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. And now we can move right into our presentation by Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse. And I believe, is Francisco? Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Francisco Gambo with the Oakland Community Health Network. I'm on the Service Network team, and I'm very excited to be here with Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse. We had a wonderful testimonial, if you will, from Sherry, so that was just, it wasn't something we rehearsed. Honestly, that was just one of those things where the timing. So it's really nice to hear that, and there's countless stories like that, which is why I think it's so important to have Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse here, so you can hear firsthand about the wonderful things that are taking place. A lot of times, because the clubhouses are so self-sufficient and do such a good job, sometimes we may not be aware of some of the exciting things that are happening. So again, this is a great opportunity to hear from them. And I'm going to introduce Joyce Rupp here. She's the director of Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse, and she's going to introduce just a couple people that showed up this evening. So anyway, Joyce.
Yes, thank you very much. As Francisco said, I am the actually program manager for the Easter Seals Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse. We're located in Royal Oak. I've been around a long time. Victoria can testify. And I first of all would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to showcase our clubhouse. It's a great opportunity for us, and we've prepared a presentation. But excuse me, a clubhouse style, we do it staff and member together. So we always work side by side. So I'd like to start out, we kind of looks like we're traveling in a pack here tonight, but the presenters I'll introduce first, and then Victoria said maybe I should introduce some of the others that are here tonight. But to my left is Karen Block, and a little bit about her story tonight. And Emily Burnett, she's been with Clubhouse now about 3 years, over 3 years. And then Greg Stryker is our male tonight on the panel. But all of them are going to kind of give a little bit of their version of our presentation. And then to my back, we have Nancy Hines, is also another staff at Dreams Unlimited, along with Emily. And then Charlene Beal, hopefully you recognize her. She is with your Oakland County, the Consumer Advisory Committee. And so is Betty Russ. She was giving me a whole long list of things that she does up here. And then, of course, you've met Sherry. And then we have, I know our executive director's here somewhere. Brent Worth is here somewhere. Brent, you are here, right? Help. And we have an advisory board for the clubhouse itself, in addition to the Easter Seals board. So we have a couple, at least, we have two of our board members here. One is Lee Eulig, and she's also, Lee, if you'd kind of just raise your hand there. She's also on the Easter Seals board, and so she's the link to our clubhouse, so there's a good connection between our advisory board and the Easter Seals board in general. And then because she was driven by her husband, we've kind of inherited her husband on our board, which is Jim Eulig. Have I missed anybody that came in? Oh, we have one of our occupational therapy students. We've had a long-standing relationship with Eastern Michigan University and their occupational therapy department. So we have Rachel Malowski tonight, who volunteered, just wanted to join us tonight. So that is great to have students. And we also have a student this semester from the sociology department from Eastern, which is a new thing for us. So I also just want to, since I have been around a few years with Clubhouse, to just thank you for supporting this model. We have expanded now from just a couple of us in the early days of Clubhouse in Oakland to now we have 4 outstanding clubhouses, all working or already accredited on Clubhouse International Accreditation. And then we'll get into more of how this is also spread across the state. So I am now going to we have our Vanna here, which is Emily. Basically, the slides we're not going to read the slides, but you have the handout, and also I understand there's our newest newsletter is in the packet that Victoria wanted us to point out. But basically what I tell people is we really just create an environment in the clubhouse where we, anybody who comes in, whether that's a visitor, a new member, or current member, staff, where everybody feels welcome. It's kind of like the old sitcom Cheers. When you walk in, everybody knows your name, which is extremely important. And so just being wanted, feeling like you have a sense of belonging is extremely important. And then we know, we have just few staff and many members, that being needed is a critical piece too. And so working side by side, we actually run a quite expensive business, as you probably know by the budget. But we do everything from, preparing meals during the day to our budget as far as making sure Medicaid gets entered and all of that, which they'll explain. And then another huge piece is being missed. So being wanted, being needed, and missed are 3, conditions I think that every human being, of course, needs. And so the missed part is our outreach program. So that would mean if we haven't seen someone for a while, we would definitely give them a call, send them a birthday card with a little snack shack card in there for some goodies and a lunch, free lunch on their birthday. So we try to make it special. But keeping that connection, because really clubhouses are really about relationships, first and foremost. They're about the membership and the relationships. And then everything else kind of falls into place. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Karen. And Karen is going to talk a little bit about her relationship with Clubhouse. Oh yeah, here we go.
Well, my background is I was hospitalized a lot and on the wrong medications, and I finally got on the right medications, but I was isolating myself at home. So a case manager told me about Clubhouse, and I started coming to Clubhouse in December of 2010, and I made a lot of friends there. I got a lot of support from people there, and I've been going there for 7 years now. I've had a couple of part-time jobs, and now I'm currently looking for independent employment again. And it's a really great place. The members kind of run the clubhouse. We as members, we run the clubhouse. The staff is just there, but we but we kind of run the clubhouse. So we run the meetings and we do tasks together. And if you want to learn how to do a new task there, it's always another member that will teach you how to do the task. So it's members teaching members there, and it's a really great place. Oh, yeah, I just wanted to mention too that since I've been coming to Clubhouse, I haven't been hospitalized, and my mom and my dad and my sister have all toured Clubhouse, and they're just amazed that I haven't been hospitalized since I've been coming to Clubhouse. There's been zero hospitalizations. And one member of the Clubhouse calls coming to Clubhouse the combo. We call it the combo because it's taking your medications and going to Clubhouse, which is what really helps you in your recovery from mental illness.
Thank you. It's nice to know who runs the clubhouse.
I move furniture.
Okay, a little about Clubhouse. There's a total of 46 clubhouses in the state. All the clubhouses at this time are working towards accreditation. Clubhouse is an evidence-based program based on international clubhouse standards, and that is the process of accreditation once you meet all the clubhouse standards. And the Dreams Clubhouse has been fully accredited since 2008, and is meeting the standards has been a priority for us since 1991.
Now we want to take a close look at dreams. So we're going to show you this video. If you want to watch this later, it's on YouTube. All the time. Is there sound? I guess you'll all have to look it up and watch it at home. Called Dreams Unlimited Clubhouse, 2016. Huh? Yep. Bills. I think at this point Karen's talking. Only check it out when you have time. So if you had seen the video, you'd see all the great things that we do firsthand at the clubhouse. But you know, what are the outcomes? What is all of these wonderful things that we do? What do we get out of it? So research and statistics worldwide prove that clubhouses keep people out of the hospital, reduce incarcerations, give people the confidence to go back to work, go back to school, and just lead positive lives within their community. And so this year, Dreams kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit. Part of the Clubhouse International Standards is that the evaluates our effectiveness on a regular basis. So this year we wanted to see how good we do at keeping people out of the hospital. It's something that we say, but how well do we do it? So we, Dreams, have surveyed not only our clubhouse, but clubhouses all around the state, asking them about their past hospitalizations and their current hospitalizations now that they're a member. So I'm going to go into those statistics that we found a little bit. So we asked people to estimate how many times they've been hospitalized for mental health in their lifetime. The average number was 8 times. And so we've surveyed, so far we have about 150 responses from people around the state. So this is just averages. So people hospitalized about 8 times. We asked them how many days their average stay was, and it ended up being about 2 weeks. People are staying in the hospital. Then we asked them how many times a year they were hospitalized on average before becoming a clubhouse member, and the average we got there was 3. We asked them how many times since becoming a member, and it's gone down. People only go about once. And actually, if you look at the chart, it's below 1, because a lot of members actually put 0, but some might have put more. And in the past year, members have gone to the hospital about 1 time. These are results specific to Dreams. Each one of these numbers is a different person. So the blue is how many times people have gone to the hospital in their lifetime. The red is before becoming a member, like how many times a year before becoming a member, and the green is how many times a year after. If you look, the green, there's barely any green. I'll just finish this up and then I'll try the video again. And then we like, numbers are nice, but we like the stories. So we also asked, what exactly is it about Clubhouse that keeps you out of the hospital? And these are just 5 of the 150 answers that we got. A lot of them are very similar. It takes away my fear. It gives me something to do. I like to be around people, just get out of the house. But, those, to us, that's really important. I'll try this video again.
Clubhouse is a great place to be. It's great support. It's a great place to come to instead of sitting at home and doing nothing. You come here, you're around all kinds of people that have the same illness as you. Some even take the same medications as you take. And you're around a bunch of people. They're all supportive. They all understand what you're going through. And you learn new tasks here. And you do tasks, and other members show you how to do the tasks. And it's a lot of fun doing the tasks, and you learn how to do new things here, which can help you get a job in the future. And it's a great place to come, and it's a lot of great support.
What I get out coming out to Dreams Clubhouse is something to do I love it. I love the clubhouse. I've been coming 12 years.
Clubhouse to me is a place where I feel accepted, safe, and they're my family. It's my home away from home.
If I can just interject, the young man that was last on the last scene he made such an impactful statement to me. He said, you know, this is a place, this one place, because he's a young man, as you could see, where I've never been bullied.
Okay, a big component of the clubhouse is meaningful work that keeps members well. We have 2 units, member services unit, which is the clerical and maintenance unit, and we also have a hospitality services unit, which is kitchen and food preparing and maintenance as well. So it's a competency-based training, and you can see some of the areas that are covered: computer training, food preparing and safety, handling money in our snack shack. As Sherry Gerby mentioned, member-to-member tutoring and education support, and also support for employment. Very important component of Dreams Unlimited is our employment program. And this slide shows how successful it is. Accredited clubhouses have a 42% employment rate versus only 20% for individuals in the public mental health system. We have 3 different types of employment, which will be explained a little more on the following slides: independent employment, supported employment, and transitional employment. Independent employment is employment that members seek out on their own and obtain on their own. And Joyce will explain more about this particular person.
Yeah, this is Sandy, and Sandy came to us actually homeless and without, any place to even look for an apartment or anything. And so the clubhouse helped the case management piece of our agency to help find, things for her apartment and things like that. And then she went on her first transitional employment position and kind of worked her way through, and now she is a peer support specialist, and she is one of us, an Easter Seals employee, and she works in our resource room over at our adult services end of the operation, and still makes time to visit us at least once a month or every couple of weeks. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of highlighted Sandy because she's worked really hard in her recovery.
Another aspect of the employment is supported employment, and that's a situation where the clubhouse has a relationship with the employer and works with the member to apply for and acquire a job of their own choosing, and it gives them any support that they need while they're working that particular job. The third and integral component to clubhouse employment is transitional employment. And it's a situation where the job is turned over to the placement manager at the clubhouse, and they select and train a member to fill the position for a 6 to 9 month period. Once it's designed to bridge the gap between the environment of the clubhouse and competitive employment. And once the key goal to transitional employment is once the 6 to 9 month position has transitioned for that particular person, then we bring another employee or clubhouse member into that position, and they become the new employee, and they train under the placement manager.
We wanted to highlight some of the benefits of transitional employment to the employers. So as Greg said, we, the clubhouse, own the job. And actually, what that means is the staff members learn the job, we're trained on the job. And so when we bring a member in, the employer doesn't have to do any of the training because we know the job, so we, the staff people, train them. So they're working with somebody who they're comfortable with. And then on top of that, if anything were to ever happen, say the member has an appointment or something were to come up, because I know the job, I'm able to go in and cover for them and work that job so that the member has job security. They know that their job will still be there, even if they have to miss a day. And the employer knows that that job will always be covered. Oftentimes we do jobs that have high turnover rates or in industries where sometimes people just don't show up, things like that, and they know that they can rely on us because even if the member isn't able to be there, then I'm gonna be there. And with transitional employment, really, rehabilitation is always the goal. We want our members to be successful, so a lot of that is, you know, mediating if there's a problem, whether it's a problem on the member's end or the employer's end. And we're just, it's like super, super supported employment.
This is a picture of my friend John. This is a picture of John with his first paycheck. He just finished a transitional employment position over at Detroit Taco. One of the benefits of transitional employment for the member is it builds a lot of confidence, and he's got a work history now. He brought home a paycheck, and you're in a better position to rejoin society through paid work. So that's a picture of John.
So this summer, we got a really unique opportunity. Easter Seals Michigan applied for a grant through the Walmart Foundation for Dreams Unlimited and the Miracle League of Michigan to kind of work together. And we were able to employ 8 of our members in this program at the Miracle League concession stand where we sold healthy wraps and smoothies. Karen was talking a little bit. Did you talk about it? So we were able to give a lot of members the opportunity to work, to go back to work, and with people who they were comfortable with. And Karen, do you want to give a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, it was a great position there. I worked with 8 other members of the clubhouse, so a bunch of us from clubhouse all worked together. We learned teamwork and we got paid, and it built our confidence. And now I have the possibility this spring to be hired by the Miracle League to work there again. So it's really been a great experience, and we all really enjoyed ourselves, us 8 members of the clubhouse.
I had the opportunity to set up the accounting for the concession stand, and that was very rewarding and challenging for me and a lot of fun. Set up spreadsheets to record the payroll, record all the expenses, and record all the fixed expenses and charges that were going on to summarize the data for the concession stand.
Oh, I make a mean smoothie. So when we worked at the concession building, I was known as the smoothie queen because I was really good at making smoothies. We had people come up to the window and order, I'm not joking, like 10 smoothies at a time or 13 smoothies at a time. And we would just be whipping up the smoothies for them, along with making wraps for them, which they loved also. So it was really great. Yeah.
Need a microphone, though.
Not sure what I'm going to say. Basically, we are always trying to find ways that we can generate some more income or revenue into our clubhouse. We have our little sales and things like that. And we have our advisory board is looking at different ways that we can bring in some other funding. So we're usually involved in those kinds of things, and we are doing a lot of advocacy type work. We go to Lansing and give, our actually, we have a legislative breakfast, legislative day that all clubhouses from around Michigan are going to be gathering in March to just try to educate the legislators about the clubhouse model and how important it is for them to kind of shift some money our way. So I think, is there anything that I missed with anybody that wanted to wrap up with anybody? All right, then I think it's to one of the important parts of our presentation is to answer any questions that you have, or if we can provide further explanation for anything.
Well, first, let me say thank you. It's a very inspiring presentation. And let me see, are there questions? Well, we'll start with Ms. Newman.
Thank you, Joyce and company. It was a very good presentation. I just had two quick questions. One of them with the transitional employment, what happens to the member after that 9-month period? Is there something else that they can transition into, or what do they do?
Yes, well, the goal would be that the one example that we gave would be Sandy, who then usually about 4 to 6 months, depending on how long the transitional employment is going to be, we would start, working with them to do a resume, things like that, to step up. And in her case, Sandy's case, then she was got a job at Easter Seals because they got to know her over there, and she had an interest in working in the resource room. So that's the goal. It's a goal. It doesn't always, sometimes after the transitional employment, they may want another transitional employment placement until they feel comfortable going into more of a job where, it's a job for as long as they and the employer agree that it's working.
My last quick question is the concession stand, where is it?
That's a great question. Easter Seals, it's the Easter Seals, Michigan, Miracle League concession stand, and it's over at the Southfield Civic Center. And they have a beautiful brand-new concession stand that they had built. Brent can answer probably more specific questions about that, but it's a ball field for not only children, but kind of, I think, adolescents as well, into with disabilities, that they can actually play ball, just like, well, not me, but other people may want to play ball. But it was a great experience because of just the opportunity to be able to, we got to know the people at the tennis courts and that sort of thing. And we're hoping that the season is longer. We kind of came into it towards the end of the season. So we're hoping to employ more of our members there in more supported employment at that point.
Thank you. Great job.
Dr. Knotts?
That's one of the things I was really struck by. And I realized it towards the end of your presentation that you've been smiling through the entire presentation, and you've said over and over and over again how much fun it is to be at the clubhouse. And I began to realize how that was carrying through with what you were doing. I have a philosophy, when we were little, we did things, we called it play. We'd make things, we'd make mud pies, we'd pound things with hammers and nails and whatever we did. In my case, I cut the grass, and I thought that was play. Until I learned later, as an adult, these same activities are called work. It's the same activity, but in one situation of our life it's called play, another part is called work. So what I've seen you guys do is you've been able to make it synonymous. We're playing, we're having fun, we're working, and making a difference in our lives and others. So congratulations.
Mrs. Summers?
Enjoyed your presentation very much. I've watched this program grow over the years, over many years, and it really has turned into something quite remarkable. You should all be very proud, and I'm so happy that you've had such wonderful success there. I'm a little curious about transportation. What do you have to, like, bring your members in? Do they have to find their own transportation? To and from work, that kind of thing.
I know that you've been around and following us for some time, so you know we had a little issue getting into our current location. And we wanted to move to be more centrally located. We were before in Oak Park, and we wanted to move so that we were closer to Woodward Avenue. So that was our real reason for moving, to get not only a better facility, but to have better transportation. And so we kind of did a little survey before that, and we discovered that the people that we were serving at the time, everybody could get to the new clubhouse except for one individual, and we helped him work through a process to be able to get there. So our transportation mainly centered around more of a convenience for our membership. At that time, I know that it's a different story in the northern part of the county and the western part of the county, but when we just found out that they used our transportation that we had at that time, which we had vehicles and that we would pick up because they could, but we also thought it was important to train them on how to use the bus system and how to manipulate around without being so dependent on us. But I regularly meet with the other clubhouse directors in Oakland, and their situations are quite different than ours. But I would say right now they either take the mainline bus, and that we're only 3/10 of a mile from Woodward Avenue, or they take the smart transportation, the smaller bus, and they have to, they can, now sophisticated, they can sign up for that on a 2 days prior to that online, and or they can do a phone call if they get up early enough in the morning. And then a lot of our members drive, or they, actually, we have a very faithful one that rides her bike all the way from, about 2 miles, and one that actually walks. So there's various ways, but we have found that we do provide transportation for activities in the evening and that sort of thing to make sure people can get home. But we have some very generous members that also now have networked together, and if they drive, they will help to coordinate getting people home and to and from clubhouse at times. So we've kind of worked it that way in our clubhouse.
Location.
Yes, it is, yeah. And by the way, we are now in our new location 11 years, and we've become very good neighbors. We've improved the property, as we said, that we would, both inside and out. And we now belong to both, we attend regularly to Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to be hosting the Royal Oak Chamber of Commerce in our building on the 9th of March, which is a huge step, I think, we really wanted to move. Our main reason was beside the building, and that is we really wanted to be part of the community, not just in the community. And so we work very hard to try to make those exterior, connections and that sort of thing.
Additional questions, comments? Well, I have one. I've just gotten into smoothies. I would suggest you publish and sell your recipes, okay?
We worked very hard on them because there were only 3 and we had them perfected. And I have to admit that I was the biggest skeptic. I couldn't really imagine me drinking something green. But I really like them now. I mean, I even drink the green one, don't I? So we have 3 different versions of it, but they are very healthy for you. Well, again, thank you very much. We really appreciated the opportunity to talk to.
No, we thank you very much for your work. Take care. Next, we have our December financials with Ncqa Accreditation. You have 2 items, actually.
Right in the middle so I can try to make sure I scan the table here. Okay, you guys have December financials in front of you in your packet. As I usually do, I will go over the highlights and then you guys can stop me or ask questions at the end. I'll check before I move on to the next statement. We're going to start with the comparative statement of net position. So what you'll note on this particular financial statement is that cash and cash equivalents went up significantly from last month. what you're seeing going on there is a timing issue. So the way our capitation payment fell this month, well, in December, was that it came at the end of the month because of all of the holidays. And so we do have some providers that we wait to pay until we get the capitation payment. So what you'll see if you jump down a little bit is accounts payable vendors and providers also went up pretty significantly in December. So that's a timing issue. So typically when you see it at the end of the month, those payments will have already been made. But in this particular month, because of the way the timing fell, it was not paid at that point in time. Moving slightly down from cash and cash equivalents are investments. What you see there is that going down just slightly. What we're starting to do is as investments mature, we're having some of them sent back to us instead of being reinvested. One of the things we heard as feedback from the service models was that some of the providers needed the payments early in the month to make payroll. So in an effort to be as efficient as possible, we adjusted our payment schedule and pushed out payments in the beginning of the month for those on service models. So that just creates different cash situations for us. So as things mature, we will build back up that cash balance so that we can provide that for providers. Moving down a little bit further, as I mentioned, into current liabilities, what you see there, that accounts payable vendors did go up significantly, and as I talked about, it's a bit of a timing issue there. And finally, the only other thing to note in this particular statement is you'll see that our net position for the year continues to go down, and what you're seeing there is the fact that we are planning to use reserves this fiscal year. So you will see that go down continually this fiscal year, and that's planned, and it's currently within our budget to do that. Anyone have?
Mr. Landsman?
So when I look at our capital assets, I see building at $26 million. What buildings do we own that are?
So currently on our books is this building, the 2011 building, because we have not officially sold that building yet. And we also, because the way the lease works with the Resource and Crisis Center, you also see that investment there as well. It's such a long lease. You'll see that and when we get to that point of where we actually have the sale of the other building happen, I'll point that out and we'll talk about it. It will change where it sits on our financial statements.
About $2 million or so.
Yeah. Correct. So I'm going to move on now to statement of activities. What I want you to remember when we look at this statement is that this is the initial budget. So this is the initial budget we did back in August, I believe. So understand that my next item on the agenda is Budget Amendment 1. So a lot of these variances you'll see get corrected after you all approve Budget Amendment 1, but we don't make those adjustments until you approve it. So bear with me a little bit on this. You'll see some adjustments. I'll point them out, but a lot of them are being corrected in Budget Amendment 1. What you see with Medicaid revenue is that it's over budget for this fiscal year. Not something we necessarily would have expected when we budgeted this year, but we also didn't know about the direct care wage money when we did this budget. So in Budget Amendment 1, that is one of the adjustments we are making to revenue is for the direct care wage increase. So that's what you're seeing primarily go on right there is the increase to Medicaid revenue for the direct care wage increase. Moving down, you'll see the OBRA reimbursement looks like it's under budget for the year, but it's really, that's a timing issue. That one tends to not be a consistent 1/12 every month, and so that one fluctuates a bit. Same with grants, we had that same situation, and then income from investments fluctuates a bit too. Anything else to material on this statement? Does anyone have any questions?
Just on that one screen, you put down on the same screen that you had up for the question Mr. Landsman had regarding the capital assets of the building. So,
Previous.
right, for just capital lease and the bonds payable at $10,300,000, is that correct? Capital lease, OC bond payable.
Yeah, so that's the remainder of what we owe on that bond.
And then the $6,411,000 is what what's remaining on this building. Is that correct?
Where you're at. Oh. Okay. So the mortgage note payable, non-current liabilities is the remainder of what we owe on this particular building.
And it, regardless, it should be paid off within 4 years?
Yeah. So we had the original 5-year mortgage, and we are well over a year into that mortgage.
So we applied the funding from the sale of the old building, and typically it could be paid off in a little over 2 years?
Yes. Follow that? No. Okay. Okay. So were there questions on the statement of revenue? So moving over to expenses. Not have it in my packet, so I'm gonna there. So if you're looking at expenses for the month of December, what you're looking at is salary and fringes looks to be a little bit over for December, but what the impact of that is 3 pay periods in one particular month. So that does fluctuate throughout the year where we have months with 3 pay periods, you will see it be a little over like that. But if you scroll over year to date, I think we're very close to budget. Moving down to core providers, core provider adults. Now remember, in the beginning of this fiscal year, we adjusted that so it's all adult services. So we broke this up a little differently this fiscal year because as in some of the direct contracts, it made more sense to group it this way than by network. So what you're looking at there is adult services basically across the networks. So that one's very close to budget. You'll see crisis services is a bit under for this particular month. And that has to do with some adjustments that were made to a core provider budget, Common Ground, on their payment schedule. Moving down to vocational services, again, this is a particularly long month, so you'll see a lot of these are a little higher than what you would anticipate over the full year. But in the month of December, with it having 31 days, you see a little bit more, and some of these being over. Going on to core provider kids, so again, that's all kids services. So there's a bit of a discrepancy in how this is reporting, which will be adjusted in Budget Amendment 1, where services are hitting. So that is one thing you will see get adjusted in Budget Amendment 1 is how that split happens for expenses. So that's one of the cleanup items we have to do as we broke the expenses out a little differently this fiscal year. Moving down, nothing terribly different. I'm looking at the Resource and Crisis Center. Again, that looks slightly off, but that's an adjustment we're going to make in Budget Amendment 1 with an adjustment to the rent that is expensed there. And in addition to that, we have healthcare integration, and that's Owen. Remember, we moved that into this regular service line now. So that one, we didn't have any payments go out in December, so that's why you see that there. That'll be all caught up next month.
Mr. Lansman.
At ABA, so autism, it's under budget for the year. That's because we're able to do assessments, but there's a back.
So part of what you're seeing there is that split I was talking about, how that split with kids and ABA is not correctly working on the financials right now. So that's one of the things when he opens the reporting back up, he will adjust how that split hits financials. So that's actually what you're seeing. So if you see how core provider kids is over, it's because some of that belongs in the ABA line. Anybody else? Assuming we are done with financials, I will move on to Budget Amendment 1. Budget Amendment 1 we reviewed at the Committee of the Whole. Steve came and talked to us a little bit about some of the adjustments going on in Budget Amendment 1. And primarily what's happening in Budget Amendment 1 is a change in revenue. So as I mentioned before, our revenue when we did this initial budget did not include the direct care wage money. So that was about $7 million of an increase that we are expecting to receive throughout the entire fiscal year for an adjustment to direct care wages. So that was added to revenue. A slight adjustment we're seeing in HAB waiver revenue as well. That was down a little bit last fiscal year just due to some slots not being filled, the old slot system. So we've been working hard to try to make sure that with providers to make sure that those are in fact being utilized because that is a significant payment that comes in related to that. In addition to that, the capitation rates are slightly adjusted in this fiscal year. So what they found when they were doing the capitation rates, I'll try to make this as short as possible. There was an adjustment they had to make when they took out some of the money for longer hospital stays. They didn't do that calculation correctly, so they made that adjustment in this fiscal year. It's a minimal adjustment, but it did have a slight impact on the capitation payments for this fiscal year. So that's the increase to Medicaid revenue that you'll see in this budget amendment. In addition to that, Healthy Michigan is actually down a little bit from fiscal year 17. It's about $2.5 million less than we had originally projected, but again, that's a slight rate decrease in this fiscal year that we did not have last year. We are actually still projecting to have a lapse in Healthy Michigan by the end of this fiscal year, but luckily for us, we are allowed to use that money as Medicaid money, so we can either start an ISF of Healthy Michigan specifically with that, or we can choose to use that money to cover the Medicaid deficits, and those are things we can talk about later in the fiscal year. The other adjustment going on in Budget Amendment 1 is autism revenue. There was an increase to autism. They also significantly changed how we're paid for autism. So we were paid last fiscal year fee-for-service for autism. The rates weren't very good. They're still not great. But now it's part of our capitation payment. So now we're paid on the number of people that are eligible, not on the actual services provided, which did increase our revenue a little bit, only by about $0.2 million. So it did go up a little, not a lot. We are still projecting to take about a $3 million loss in that particular line item in this fiscal year. I do notice in the proposed fiscal year 19 budget, autism is supposed to get a pretty significant increase in fiscal year 19, and I did hear that fiscal year 18 they're going to ask for a supplemental to help with this fiscal year. Total increase to Medicaid revenues was about $8 million, higher than what we had originally projected, but that primarily is the adjustment for direct care wage increases. Substance use was increased slightly, just about $80,000, but that's really a carry forward from fiscal year 17 into fiscal year 18. That's a corresponding expense that goes with it, so it's basically a wash. Grant revenue is slightly adjusted in fiscal year 18, Budget Amendment 1, just because it was a couple of grants that were not included in the original budget that will be added with Budget Amendment 1. Moving down to for questions real quick on any revenue questions you have before I move on. If that's helpful. No? Okay, moving on to expenses. There's a couple things being adjusted in expenses. The first, which is listed here, is the crisis and acute services projection decreased slightly. And if you remember when Steve talked about this, there were a couple things going on there. We are adjusting the number of beds we contract with Common Ground for crisis residential units. So we are actually increasing that a little bit because the utilization is there to use those as a diversion to hospitalization. So that is actually causing it to go up a little bit, but there's a couple of adjustments that are causing it to go down. There was an adjustment made to the rent for Common Ground, the way we do back and forth on the rent for the Resource and Crisis Center. So that's an adjustment that was duplicated in there, which we are adjusting in Budget Amendment 1. So that's taking up the bulk of why you see it going down when we have a couple of other adjustments here. And the last, there was a slight increase in the community hospital rates for this fiscal year. It had been, I think, 4 or 5 years since we did any community hospital rate adjustments. So we did include a small increase to community hospital rates this fiscal year. So that is also included in this particular line item. And that's why the net of it all is still a reduction, but there are some offsetting increases to that particular line item. In expenses, you see claims and use tax going up slightly, but that has to do with the Medicaid revenue increase. So it's basically 1% of the Medicaid revenue we receive, we pay back in taxes. And then finally, we're in the process, I think we actually have the majority of the direct care wage money out at this point. So that is all being pushed out. There's a $7 million expense adjustment you see. It's actually sitting currently in vocational and non-vocational. That split will be cleaned up a bit once all the money is pushed out. And we have, at the time we did this, we didn't have all of the detail behind that. But as a placeholder, just so the expense shows up in our financials, it's sitting right there. And that's what that $7 million adjustment is, which is exactly the same amount of revenue we expected to bring in.
Mr. Lansman.
Are you saying that we preload the expense?
Oh, sort of, yes. What we did, even though, so it's added to our capitation payment, so what that means is we're getting it 1/12 every month instead of all at once. But for us, from an administrative perspective, and for providers from an administrative perspective, it's much more efficient for us to do this once and get it done with. So it took us some time to gather the data to do it accurately and in a way that we felt like we could support to make sure the money was going where it was supposed to go. So it didn't go out until just recently, but we collected person by person, hour by hour to know where it should go and how much each provider should get. But yes, we pushed it out all at once so that it helps with cash flow for all providers in general, but it also helps for them to manage that and push it out to their staff in the most efficient way for them.
Does that mean then in fourth calendar quarter, so October to December, when we do a true-up on other kinds of related expenses, we would on their staffing?
Yes, there's an expectation written into the contract language that any money that they don't push out has to come back to us. So that will be an expectation that they have to be able to provide documentation related to pushing out the money. So any unspent money does come back to us, and we in turn have to send it back to the department if it doesn't go out. No, they were very specific about this particular adjustment, that if it didn't go out, it had to be turned in.
Makes sense to up on that facet?
I don't ever like to send money back, so we will figure out a way how to. We'll make sure that any adjustments that need to be made are handled appropriately.
Any additional questions?
An item.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve budget amendment number 1?
Move.
Support.
Been moved by Dr. Topp, seconded by Dr. Klotz. Is there discussion or questions? Then may we have a roll call vote?
Yes.
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 There being no, I did not hear a nay, so I believe you have a unanimous approval.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. Next, we have a presentation by the several presentations by the Office of Recipient Rights. Vicki Suter.
I think we're good. We're good.
Good evening to all of you.
Good evening. I'm getting my yearly presentations in tonight.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity to present some wonderful people for appointment. I'm going to have folks just introduce themselves real quick, if you don't mind. You want to start?
I'm Hava. I'm Hava Lightman. I did my internship with
Can you speak into the microphone? If the red light is on, then it's working for you.
Is it work?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. My name's Hava Lightman. I did my internship from Oakland University. I was in the Masters of Public Administration, core concentration, nonprofit organization and management. And thanks to Dr. Mellos, the head of the director of Hawthorne Center, who was once upon a time my, almost like my legal ward. I lived in Hawthorne Center for most of my life. He had contacts with the head of the Recipient Rights Department, and I started my internship there, and then got moved over to the Customer Service Department, and I learned a lot. My favorite was my first day, where I come in and I go through a 2-3 hour, training, and then Chad comes and takes me out to lunch, and we go back into his office, and he puts down right in front of me the 100-some page mental health code. He's like, here, read this. And every day he's like, how far have you gotten? I'm like, I don't know. It keeps repeating itself over and over again.
Thanks, Hava.
No problem.
Hi, I'm Liz Genovitz. I'm going to make mine a little shorter. I am a former consumer with TTI. I have several committees under my belt, 3 here with OCHN, 2 with training and treatment. That's about it.
Hello, my name is Betty Ruiz, and I am a secondary consumer of Easter seals. I am also a member of the Recipients' Rights Advisory Committee, the Alternative to Guardianship Work Group, and also the Strategic Planning Work Group.
Renee?
Yes. And see over there.
My name is Renee Utah. I am on several committees here at OCHN, and I also write for the 2 newsletters here.
My name is Jean Fettner. I am the newer manager of the Office of Recipient Rights.
All right, our first approval that we need is appointment to the Recipient Rights Advisory Committee. We have 4 individuals that we're presenting to you. Angela Holt, who is not with us tonight, it would be a new member to the Recipient Rights Advisory Committee. She is an Armed Force veteran. She brings a variety of experiences to the committee, including having a family member with a disability, working with individuals with disabilities for many years in group home settings, as well as other experiences. I think she's currently working at the Salvation Army. Liz Janovitz, who you've met, is no stranger to committees here at Oakland Community Health Network. She brings a variety of experiences with her, including being part and chair of the CAC here and Adult Provider Network. She brings interesting experiences with her of living in a group home, being in recovery, and now being an alumni of Oakland CHN Services. Our third individual will be Hava Leichman, who you've also met today. As she's mentioned, she has several degrees, very educated individual. She is part of our BEST work group, interned at the Rights Office, and brings a wealth of varying experiences for her own mental health to the committee. Our fourth individual would be Renee Udo, who you've met tonight. Renee is a returning member. Renee had served 2 terms. This would be her last term, so her third and final term, if you approve her. She has been a lifelong advocate of individuals with disability, been chair of the advisory council, and you recently appointed her to the appeals committee. So the Recipient Rights Advisory Committee would like to ask that you approve these individuals. We think that they'll be a great asset and a good mix to the committee. We also want to be sure that we recognize our outgoing members, Jeffrey Bryant, Adam Hirsch, Priscilla Williams, Denise Stargill, and Dominique Schroeder, all excellent members. We're sorry to see them go. Happy to see the new members. So if you would so approve, I would appreciate that.
Is there a motion to approve Angela Holt, Elizabeth Janovitz, Hava Lightman, and Renee Uto to the Recipient Rights Advisory Committee?
I would like to make that, I would like to make that motion.
Thank you. And Mrs. Summers, did you second? Okay. It's been moved by Mr. Landsman, seconded by Mrs. Summers. Is there any discussion? Yes, Dr. Tom.
I ask this every time. If somebody is termed out, like Renee, that this will be her last term, and nobody's been, they always say they're going to look it up, but if somebody serves and they can no longer serve, and then they sit out for a term, can they then start the term limits again, or is it permanently for the rest of your life?
Right.
You're out?
The policy indicates you can serve 2 consecutive terms of 3 years. After 6 months, you can be appointed to one final 3-year term. Right.
So this is your last 3-year term? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, a motion is on the floor. Are there any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Congratulations and thank you for serving.
Thank you. Our second approval will be for reappointment to the Recipient Right Advisory Committee. We have 2 individuals that have served 1 term. We'll be asking you to reappoint them to their 2nd term. Amit Agrawal, who is just, fantastic, shares many of his ideas, is also works for us as a contractor and does group home training for individuals that live in group homes about their basic rights, dignity, respect, and some other issues. Nicole Gittleman is our current chair. She also is a lifelong advocate, very involved in clubhouse setting, speaks out about issues related to folks with disability and mental illness. I will have to say Nicole will not be able to attend meetings for a few months. She's had a health issue and is going to be needing surgery. That surgery was delayed. So I talked to her the other day. She expects that she'll probably be back about July. The committee does understand that she's going to be out for a little bit, but we still would like her to be reappointed. So I just wanted you to know her situation.
Is there a motion to approve Amit, how do you pronounce his last name? Agrawal?
Agrawal.
And Nicole Gittleman, reappoint the Recipient Rights Advisory.
I would like to make that motion to reappoint Amit and
Landsman,
Nicole.
raise your hand, because you're jumping in front of people. Okay, Mr. Landsman has moved that they be approved. Is there a second?
So moved.
And seconded by Ms. Newman. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our last appointment is to the Appeals Committee. We did have a member resign from the Appeals Committee because she decided to retire and move to another state. We do appreciate her many years of dedication to that, and her name was Lauren Shepard. So that gave us a vacancy, and the Appeals Committee really wanted to have balance in that group. So we were looking for someone who had experience with mental illness. And so I've known Betty for a number of years, Betty Ruas, and I felt that she would be a really good addition to the Appeals Committee. I've asked her to be on. She's been very dedicated to it, make sure that she's prepared, reads the material. She has a whole laundry list of ways she's been involved here, has had a lifelong experience having a disability and advocating. So I'm asking that Betty Ruas be appointed to our Appeals Committee.
Is there a motion to approve Betty Ruas's appointment?
Move.
Is there a second? Been moved by Mrs. Summers, seconded by Mr. Landsman. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here tonight, and thanks for being a part of our committees. All right.
Okay. And you have a report for us?
All right, each year we're required to submit a report to the state regarding the activities of the Recipient Rights Office, and we are also required, but also we want to report to the board the activities of the Rights Office. So that's what we're doing here today. I've given you two items. One is the actual report that was sent to the state, so you have an idea of the information they asked for and the data that we present. And then we have a PowerPoint of our presentation to try to make the numbers a little more palatable, that they actually make some sense versus looking at a bunch of little numbers on a spreadsheet. So some of the information is directly from the report, and if it is, I've noted what page of the report that information is from. So it's a little easier to walk through. And then there's just some other comparative information that we've provided. So for slide 1, it just talks about our service sites audit. So we are required to visit every site that we have a contract with or pay dollars to provide services. We have to go there every year to do an audit. We have 369 sites, and we visited all 369. So we are in 100% compliance with that. Appeals information, so we track how many appeals that come through the year. We did have 5 individuals submit. I need the next slide, please. We had 5 people submit appeals. The committee accepted 4. 1 was not accepted. Out of the 4 that were heard by the appeals committee, 3 were upheld. 1 was sent back for reinvestigation. Slide. This is just a picture over the years of what our allegation numbers and substantiation rates look like. So for this year, we were a little less than last year, but still within the average range. So you can see things kind of go up and down over the years. Complaint data summary. So we had 993 allegations submitted. This is on page 3 of your report. 871 of those we investigated, and we substantiated 312, which gave us a rate of a 31% substantiation rate. If you look, I did some comparison with the state, just so you kind of know how we land up in our substantiation rate. We don't have 2017 information yet because they have not issued their annual report, but we're typically, right around. We're not a lot higher or lower than what the state average typically is. Just to give you some additional relevance related to information, so rights allegation versus person that we served, again, this just kind of represents that it's kind of steady. So the number of persons served and the number of allegations that we get, it's around 4 or 5% each year. 2017 was similar. Substantiate allegations. So again, just taking a look at the numbers to see, is this year different than other years? It is not. We were really at about 1 to 2% of a substantiation rate based on the persons that we served. And then just taking a little granular look at abuse and neglect. So each of those 6 years, abuse and neglect substantiated allegations are less than 1% of the number of persons we serve. So it's 0.2% of the persons we serve for abuse and 0.6% for neglect. Substantiations for persons served. So I'm just taking a look at some of the counties around us, or ones that are similar to us. So if we look at the allegation substantiation rates, we're at 38%. Detroit Wayne's at 35, and Macomb's at 40. And then the percentages based on persons served for allegations of substantiation. Again, we're not totally out of bounds. Macomb tends to be a little bit of an outlier. They're always much, much higher than everybody else. And substantiations for persons served, again, just looking at our neighboring counties, how do we match up? So rights allegations, allegation substantiation, again, we're at 31%, Macomb at 39, and Detroit Wayne at 27. So we're kind of in the middle there. Then based on persons, wait, go back, based on persons served, again, we end up sort of in the middle of the 3 counties. Complaints per person served, again, just a comparison, just to give you some information. We fall in the middle there. Oakland at 3%, Detroit Wayne at 2%, and Macomb at 8%. Complaint source, so this indicates where do the complaints come from. So the percentage, the highest percentage is from the OR office. We do open a number of our complaints from incident reports that we receive. Then also from staff, and then from recipients that we serve. So those 3 categories make up the bulk of where we get our complaints. The numbers are somewhat similar to what they were last year. There's not a big difference on where those complaints have come from.
In the next area, we're looking at completed investigations. This is the timeframes. One of the things to point out regarding the numbers here is that the state has us reporting numbers in terms of allegations. So while it says 48 overall for this fiscal year, that's really about 36 investigations overall in terms of being out of compliance. So we had a 94% compliance rate for getting investigations done within the allotted time frame. So next slide. This is a graph that Vicki put in here that's reflecting a select number of the complaints that we look at. Abuse, neglect, safety, treatment suited, dignity and respect. This is on page 3 through 6 of your report. As you can see, the numbers have been, for abuse and neglect, have been going up and down. The other 3 have been staying relatively stable. Overall, we are down with the substantiated violations in abuse and neglect for this fiscal year.
For this particular slide, you have to remember that each year we serve a different number of individuals or have received a different number of allegations. So it's not indicating based on that things have gone up. This is just saying of those that we have substantiated in each of those years, where do they fall in order? So neglect is we've substantiated the most. And then treatment suited to condition. And so basically what it's showing you is a trend over the years. Those have stayed the same. There's not a big swing in which one rises to the highest level of substantiation. It's pretty constant. And I think that's probably pretty consistent throughout the state.
Substantiated investigations, providers are expected to return to us a remedial action plan. And the remedial action is how are they going to prevent recurrence? And it also reflects what has been done with individual staff members. So what you see now from remedial actions, every allegation that is substantiated has to have a remedial action. And so if you look at here, you'll see a lot of numbers regarding consequences for staff. But then if you look at some of the things that providers did to try to prevent recurrence, then we're looking at training, things like policy changes, everything that they could possibly build in that would prevent recurrence of that or similar types of occurrences within their own organization. So once again, for remedial actions, you may actually have more than one remedial action for an allegation. It might be the staff was written up, and the staff was trained, and then there was individual counseling done, or things like that. The other thing I wanted to say about remedial actions is that sometimes, most of the time, they are associated with substantiations. Sometimes for non-substantiations, we do have some recommendations that we pose within reports. So even though the allegation was not substantiated, we may request or recommend that there be a policy change or something like that to help prevent recurrence of similar situation. Next. These are the remedial actions by our service population. The significant number of our investigations have to do with individuals with developmental disabilities, so therefore the remedial actions would be similar. All right. We have basically the people with developmental disabilities, and then also the habilitation waivers and that. So it's by population. We do a lot of training, and the training team does a lot of training. We already commented during the approval for the RAC and the advisory committee, the number of things that we're involved in regarding consumer education. Going out into various sites, educating people on person-centered planning and on dignity and respect. So there's a great deal of effort that goes into really trying to help our individuals that receive services understand what their rights are. But obviously, from a training perspective, the biggest trainings that we provide are those that are for initial training for new hires within the county, and also then for annual updates. And so when we look at the modality by which training is provided, the vast majority is provided in a live format. So the annual update training is done online. So as a result of all of that, we've got a couple of things that we are working on for fiscal year 18. One of them is to continue to decrease the complaint resolution overage number. So we want to be able to say that we are doing all of our complaint resolution within the 90 days. We're continuing to work with the Southeastern Michigan Offices of Recipient Rights to get some common understanding and some common recipient rights training in place. A few things have happened. Hospital policy reviews are being shared. We have rights online training. So there's some efforts that already have been put in place regarding that particular outcome. And then the third one is really looking at how do we educate recipients, persons receiving services, when they have first contact with our organization and with the provider network. How are we being really effective? And so that's one thing that we've been really putting some efforts into. So any questions that we can answer for you?
Mr. Lansman.
Is included. Right. Unfortunately, with the state report on your outcomes for the year you're reporting on, you can either put completed or ongoing. We weren't really completed on our fiscal year 17, so we had no choice but to have them ongoing.
Additional questions? Thank you very much, Vicki.
Thanks for having us.
Next, we have part one, I think, of Kathleen's year-end report. Good evening, Kathleen, and how many parts are there?
Good evening, and hang on to your seats. I'm not going to go through every goal in this annual plan, but this is the year-end report for FY17, and as you know, that year-end ended on the September 30th of last year. We've got a little bit of a late start in going through this. We thought we were going to start this report last month, but we got bumped a little bit, or I got bumped nonetheless. I think you'll find that as I go through this year-end report, you'll note that many of the staff and people we support, where appropriate, came forward and presented to the board, so there shouldn't be any surprises. There might be a few updates, and I think you'll also note that many of these goals and objectives have carried over into FY18. So there shouldn't be, as I said, any surprises. We will be reviewing, or I will be reviewing, goals 1 through 3. So that includes administration and operations, advocacy and empowerment, and budget and finance. And I just want to talk a little bit about the advocacy and empowerment, because one of the things that we always want to do with that is make sure that people we support have the opportunity to come before you and before the public and really talk about their role in developing, monitoring, advancing goals and objectives. And I think the clubhouse presentation and the folks who came before us and got appointed and reappointed to the recipient rights committees are fine examples of that. So let me start with the administration and operations goal. And the first goal has to do, if you'll advance the slide, has to do with accreditation. And many of you are very aware of the National Committee for Quality Assurance, or Ncqa Accreditation. It seems like the never-ending story for us. We began this several years ago, and we have a couple of objectives related to that. And the first objective has to do with really implementing what we call the HEDIS measures, or the Healthcare Effectiveness Data Information Set. That is a set of measures that's used in the healthcare industry, and that certainly has been advanced by the department, most recently in our joint contracts with the Medicaid health plans and the PIHPs. We are using the ProAct tool. It is now called the Relias tool. They were purchased, ProAct was purchased by Relias, and so it is a tool that we overlay with our claims data, helps us make sense of all those millions of claims lines that we have, but those ProAct tools allow us to look at information, and it does mirror the HEDIS measures. We do have 5 indicators that we're looking at, and one in particular looks at diabetes. That certainly is a chronic condition that's typical not only of folks that we support, but also the public in general. And the indicator with the Medicaid health plans in particular is also looking at diabetes, specifically for people with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So we're starting to get really in alignment with healthcare goals and objectives. The second objective to the NCQA information really has to do with getting ourselves ready for the certification. So we have been working very hard on policies, processes, data sets to make sure that we're in line for a mock survey. And in the spring, actually, we're rapidly moving towards spring. In April, we expect to have a mock survey in preparation for a final survey at the end of this year or into early next year. Might note that several years ago, you approved $200,000 for this endeavor. We thought we were going to use consultants a little more than we have. We found that we really needed to understand the guides and the measures and the expectations. So to date, we've used about $40,000 and have used the company or the contractors more in consult work rather than rolling up their sleeves and doing the actual work, which we have done at this organization. Data analytics certainly is something that we have advanced. Many of you have seen a number of dashboards presented with by the various teams who come before you. We are really looking at dashboards to monitor what we call the gap between authorization and utilizations by population served, by agency, by benefit plan. We have dashboards developed and they're reviewed by the practice improvement leadership team meetings. And we have found by using dashboards, providers pay attention to what's authorized, what's utilized. We also do that, and in talking about that, we have shrunk the gap between what's authorized and utilized. That information can tell you several things. It could tell us that we have a service network capacity issue. It could also tell us that we might be over-authorizing. But when you take that data, you always ask questions and then really drill down into what it really means by service model and by outcome that we're looking for. Have a couple of evidence-based practice dashboards. So it's not just in service model, but it is around what are the evidence-based practices. We talked last year about parent management training Oregon model, as well as trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. We are, again, looking at outcomes and what is the variance in service authorization and the outcome received. Next goal has to do with developing dashboards to identify trends related to inpatient admissions, authorizations, again, by population served. We do have all those dashboards that have been developed, and I previously indicated we do look at them quarterly, and many of these dashboards are tied to incentive payments. So we really see that we're looking at the dashboards and tying them to outcomes for people served and payment based on the outcome. The next area has to do with innovative technology. Last year, we took a hard look at related to the electronic healthcare record, and early in the year, many of you know that we entered into a contract with PCE and have continued to improve the electronic healthcare record. Objective has to do with a cost-benefit analysis. We were actually taking Objective 2, moving it on, taking a look at personal emergency response system. I must say we have found that we haven't been as successful in this area, but I'm going to plead a little creative procrastination in this area because we looked originally, if you'd please move the slide up, thank you. We looked at a system where there were a number of phones installed on the walls, and you had the opportunity to listen into people's homes to make sure that they were safe as needed without necessarily having to have staff in the home and being kind of intrusive to people's lives. We're now looking at technology, and it certainly has advanced. So we're in this area, we're looking at the Google Home, Alexa, wearable smart devices, and rethinking how we can accomplish supporting people not only in their homes, but also in the community, and to provide them greater independence. So we expect to do a little bit of a quantum leap here as we look forward and providing assistance and support to people. Another area that we are addressing is performance-based contracting. Many of you know that we've had those contracts related to ACT and applied behavioral analysis. Some of those started in the previous fiscal year. In FY17, we looked at developing contracts and service models around employment and residential services, targeted case management, and many of those service models and funding models began October 1st. Next objective has to do with negotiating new contracts. As we indicated, we're contracting for outcomes, so we initiated new performance-based contracts for autism services and for adults with mental illness. And again, we were looking at the implementation of the service funding models for all core providers, and we have included in all the contracts, if not new service models, there are incentive-based contracts, and we've been doing that for quite some time in terms of paying for outcomes. Provider network development and management, and we will continue to ensure quality services with a competitive outcome, with a competitive network. And certainly we're looking at this as the department expects us to address efficiencies in how we perform our services, reducing rate variances across the network, and making sure that we fulfill all of the department's contractual requirements through our PIHP and CMH contracts. We had created a core provider agency template or framework, and that was initiated at the beginning of FY18 and was signed by all core provider organizations. There was some consistent boilerplate language in there around risk language, risk management, financial language that we wanted to make sure as we moved forward with new service and funding models that we had support to providers as they made the transition to these new outcome-based contracts. Next objective has to do with issuing requests for proposals. There were proposals for applied behavioral analysis, vocational employment, and non-vocational skill building services. Many of the contracts were signed, some before October 1st, many by the end of the year, and we began direct contracting with vocational and non-vocational providers on January 1st of this year. And says pretty much the same thing, that we had negotiated contracts and we're 100% complete with that. What we also wanted to do was evaluate provider training. We had the opportunity to speak to a number of providers. Many of you know that we have worked over the last year or two around reciprocity of training across the metro region. We have a staff person who's been very involved in that. Marquita Massey has represented us not only locally, but certainly at the state level. There is a more active state level training group that's meeting now, and they're again looking at consistency of training in any ways that we can get efficient, not only in terms of reciprocity of training, but using new technologies and making sure that people and staff, providers have easy access to training. We want to take a look at the delegated functions as we look at doing direct contracting. We need to look at what we have to do directly that core providers had done, what needs to be left at the core provider organization in order to work jointly to ensure quality services through the contracting process. As we go into FY18 and look at additional direct contracting, we are also, again, taking another sweep or another look at what delegated functions need to be brought in and administrative functions and what needs to be left in the network. Goal 2 has to do with advocacy and empowerment, and many of you know a lot of the work that has been done with the Advocacy Committee. And certainly our goal is to make sure that locally at a state level and at national level that people's interests are served and that we are aware of the issues, we're well informed, we have consistent talking points, and that we support people to have the opportunity to speak at legislative sessions or locally to be prepared to speak to their local legislators. The objective has to do with advocacy opportunities. We really want to make sure that people, again, understand that they have the opportunity to develop and come forward and speak, whether it's people we provide directly, family members, or advocacy groups. We did hold a forum in June of last year, and we continue to hold public forums and advocacy work groups. And many of you know that Community Health Network, and quite frankly, many of the provider agencies are very active in making sure that information is pushed out to individuals and families through their own websites, social media, and newsletters. Things we also wanted to do was make sure that people understood the budget reductions or rebasing, why it was happening, what the amount was, and then how to go about legislatively advocating for the appropriate amount of money for the mental health system, not only in Oakland County, but certainly across the state. So we do maintain updated legislative contacts and lists on our website, and periodically go back and rework the talking points so that people have the most current information about what's happening with the funding revenue situation in Oakland County and certainly in Michigan. We do continue to keep our eye on boilerplate 298, and that is the proposed funding from the public mental health system to the Medicaid health plans. We worked with the Community Mental Health Association. We most recently talked about that at a Metro Region Board meeting last week, and brainstormed a little bit on where we need to go forward with the issuance of the RFI, request for interest, and from the community mental health organizations and the Medicaid health plans. We know that applications have been submitted, and we're likely to hear soon which organizations chose to apply, and quite frankly, that takes us one step closer to testing out the money moving from the public system to the Medicaid health plan or the private system. So we keep our eye on that, and we determine what kind of advocacy needs to occur around that. We have conducted a survey to make sure that people understand the funding talking points, and many families and people responded to a survey that was done last year. And because of that, we continue, as I said, to refine our talking points and making sure that the information is in the newsletters and any social media that we participate in and then push out to the providers. And they also have a complimentary media campaign. Next issue has to do with anti-stigma education, and I know you're very familiar with that. We have BEST, which is Begin Ending Stigma Today, as well as the anti-stigma team from Community Network Services. They've worked much more closely together, established some goals, and an objective one. I think if you'll move to the next slide, you'll see that there has been the development of a video, I'm Just Like You. I think many of you have seen that. If not, I really highly recommend that, and we'll make sure you know where to find that. I believe on our website you can find it. But that was a collaborative with Community Network Services, Community Living Services, and Oakland Community Health Network. The other thing we wanted to make sure happened was that the BEST team developed some goals into FY17 and into FY18, and those goals have been established certainly and really to represent all people, not just people with mental illness, where the stigma team started, but really to represent all people and making sure that people with substance use are also involved. So we do see that group coming before you. I think not too long ago, there was a presentation on the kind of work that's being done collaboratively, and there'll be, many of us receive biweekly stigma tips, and it's an opportunity really for us to say, hey, what are we doing? How are we taking a hard look at ourselves and what we might be contributing to the continuation of stigma for the people who come to receive services from us. And the CNS anti-stigma team members are represented at the advocacy meetings, and I think that has been a positive outcome, not only for the education and PR folks from the provider organizations, but I think by making sure that these groups, the anti-stigma and the BEST groups are represented, they learn a lot, and so that mutual working together has yielded some real positives to the campaign. Community education, boy, we have a lot of objectives, don't we? This is only the first 3 goals. Community education is really very important, and we want to increase the role of not only Oakland Community Health Network, but the entire provider network and everyone who comes to the table to support people who need services and recovery or self-determination and all those things that we support people with. So in increasing our role, we want to make sure we use various media avenues. I know that we have had campaigns we've had resource fairs, we've had quarterly communication and outreach activities, we've had network events. So if you'll move forward, please. Yes. We make sure that we involve the community as much as possible. We also know through this particular objective that if there's public comment or request for information, we have an organized fashion that if it's a work with customer services and the communication team, we want to make sure that we have consistent content and processes for getting information to people. We'll move to objective 3, please. We want to increase and track our presence on community work groups. We have a lot of employees at Oakland Community Health Network. We are very active. I think many of you know our mantra, if you're going to show up, you better speak up. And so we want to make sure that our voice continues. If people choose to work elsewhere, we want to make sure we have somebody who comes in behind and works on those teams, and also that we are aware of who's doing what in the community so that we can really take that information and use it as a momentum to move forward rather than working in silos. Objective 4, we want to develop and launch a comprehensive community mental health campaign. This speaks for itself. Many of you have seen some billboard and bus advertisements. We have video stories we've developed, cable television spots, and electronic messaging. One of the things we wanted to do was make sure the public was more aware of our access organization or access point. Several years ago, substance use was, I'm going to say absorbed, but that's not the case. They became part of our organization and really, quite and frankly, enhanced who we are. So instead of having an access point and a PACE point for substance use, we have merged those teams, and we now have a new brochure, which really is an access brochure that covers all population groups. And we want to create and launch a media campaign for the Do Your Part, Be the Solution initiative that really is tied to the opioid and heroin epidemic. We had that campaign, and we planned a new campaign for fiscal year 2018 using many of the spots that we talked about earlier in terms of bus advertisements and billboards. Objective 7 talks about creating a new logo, and that was introduced in May of 2017. Next area has to do with person-centered planning. Many of you know that this was a multiple-year initiative. We did develop some training. If you'll move to objective 1, please. And what we found out midway is that the department decided to hire somebody to be on point with person-centered planning and develop training around that. So this next series of objectives, you'll find that we really have stepped back from active work on that in lieu of working with the department and sharing what we've done thus far so that we can get a statewide consistent approach around any person-centered planning training that's developed, the curricula development, as well as ways that they want to deliver that training and educate people, families, staff, organizations around person-centered planning. And many of you know that person-centered planning was highlighted in a strong way during the 298 work groups and getting feedback from people in advocacy groups that there was drift in person-centered planning. So we certainly intend to be very active at the state level. Again, objective 2, we deferred that. And going to the next section, this is civil rights and guardianship. And what we've done with this is taken a look at the data that was provided to us through the National Core Indicator Project and discovered that Oakland County has large number of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have appointed guardians. And we also know that for people with mental illness, there's a real concern about their representation by a public guardianship organization. So we developed a work group. It's a very, very active work group. Many of the people we support sit on that committee and provide feedback. We presented several months ago to the board. What we're going to be looking at now is a resource guide from another state to use as a template for training and as a tool. And we've shared that information at the state level. They have now developed a statewide group around guardianship. So we want to keep it moving, but we want to make sure we don't get too far ahead so that we can be in sync again with what's happening at the state level. We do need to develop a provider directory. So if you'll move to the next objective, we have to have that provider directory in accordance with the National Committee on Quality Assurance requirements. And so we've been working diligently on that and are reformatting that, and we'll be reissuing it in the spring of 18 soon. We'll continue to develop orientation guidelines for people and families. We have a person-provider partnership brochure. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it really talks about people's responsibilities, provider responsibilities, and we will also have the recipient rights booklet and service handbook that's handed out at that time. On to goal 3, budget and finance. Anya and Minnie and Steve and others have talked about the work we've done in this area. Quite frankly, it's beyond just budget and finance. We have various teams who've done cross-work around outcome-based contracting, and this area really talks a lot about that in terms of developing service models and funding models. And I think I've already told you that we have launched several this last year. What we're looking at moving into FY18 is taking some of the work that was done in FY17 and now refining it and launching it. This year we expect to have a service model for providers for people around kids with serious emotional disturbance. We are looking to launch that or implement that April 1st of this year, and the rest of going into FY18 will be about continuing work around intellectual and developmental disabilities and developing service and funding models with that. One of the things we also do is monitor expenses and projections around budget reduction plans. Many of you know that the rebasing occurred over several years and ended last year, yet we continue to feel the effects of that, and so we continue to work toward balancing the budget. Funding strategy. If you'll go to the next objective, we worked with MTM, a contractor. That work was done early last year. That has been completed. Objective 2 is piloting funding models. I think I've already talked about how we've done some piloting. We were pretty ambitious because if you'll see, the objective said pilot new funding models with all populations. We did not do that last year. That was pretty ambitious. And so in order to structurally transition and administratively transition to these models, we really spread that out. So you'll see the completion of those models in FY18. This is just another continuation or repetition, actually, of some of the contracting work and when we're going to launch those models. Value-based purchasing, again, this one actually has to do with the direct service providers and staff wages. Anya and others in budget and finance talked about continuation of the 50-cent increase That was initiated by this organization. On top of that, we have a 50-cent increase or direct care wage pass-through for FY18 that Anya talked about earlier. We will continue to redirect any available fund to increase staff compensation. We know that we're committed to making sure that people get as close to living wage as possible. It keeps becoming more and more difficult to hit that. The cost of living continues to go up, and so we track that and will continue to redirect funds as necessary. We do have a risk strategy plan, and I don't know if folks know, but every year we do have to submit a financial risk strategy plan to the department, and we will continue to follow the revenue streams and be vocal about any changes. Certainly, we've been vocal about rebasing. We know that with the migration, if you will, of funding from straight Medicaid or DABS, as they call it, disabled, blind, aged and blind, thank you very much, that we've seen unexpected reduction in revenue. So we continue advocacy efforts in all those areas. As I said, we focus on this information. We look at quarterly outcomes and service models and funding streams, and track all of that to make sure we know exactly what's happening with revenue expenditures in our budget. Finally, we coordinate with our local partners on resources for people who are no longer using OCHN services. Many of you know with the reduction in general fund, a number of people transitioned from our organization, and it's important for people to know that we have funded psychiatric services and have provided funding for medications who no longer qualify for services, and that's done primarily via Oakland Integrated Health Network. And with that, I'm at the end of this report, and part 2 will continue next month.
You still didn't answer my question. How many parts are there? Mr. Lanza.
Oh, yes, I did not, did I? I think I will say 3, because trying to get the rest in part 2 will be a little much for me as well as you, I'm certain.
Mr. Landsman. I do know that we, in FY18, have reduced that number, not as significantly as I hoped. I think there's a feel that if you're going to do it anyway, you might as well report on it. This last strategic planning cycle, we ended up with 7 goal areas. That is a little high. I think we had started with 5 or 6. And we'll take a hard look at that going into the strategic planning cycle. Well, that's interesting because it is expected that we do that. Sometimes it's a little harder to tease that information out from the claims data. So we are taking a hard look at that, and we do have data around a lot of those requirements from the department, but that is an expectation, certainly with diabetes, and we work with the provider network to make sure we get that in.
hard look at that.
Additional questions? No. Oh,
I
okay.
think I've exhausted everyone.
Thanks
you.
very much, Kathleen. And next, Matt Owens, and it's listed as Service Network Team Update.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ask Ms. Eliason to come and join me. The topic I'm going to talk about may lead to you all having a few questions about some finances, and I thought if it does, then I'd like to have her here just to ask a little bit. I wasn't intending on doing too much of a deep dive into the finances, but you may have questions, as I said, and I want to be able to honor those questions with some answers. So in lieu of some of the agenda items, the S&T standard update was moved off of the agenda, but we are going to be releasing a request for qualifications for specialized residential services and community living supports in advance of the next board meeting. And with that in mind, I thought it was important that we come before you today to just talk to you a little bit and provide an update on some of the happenings and some talking points so that you have that in advance of that release. We had talked about the request for qualifications at previous board meetings or COWs as just brief updates, but given that it's going to be coming out, you may be hearing some things from the community or public or providers coming to you, and I wanted to have some of that information with you so that you have that awareness and offer opportunity for questions. So some of the things we'll do, I'm going to kind of go over this a little briefly. Some of this will be a little bit of a recap, but some of it will be additional information and some figures and numbers and data that I'm going to provide so that you have awareness of what this picture will look like and some of the steps that we have in place to progress this plan moving forward, okay? So, talking a little bit about requests for qualifications, what's the difference between a request for qualifications and a request for proposal? We have recently done the request for proposal relative to the VOC and non-VOC services, as you know. A request for proposal is a process that's a formal request for a provider to provide services. It's open to bidders in and out of the current network. A lot of this is very much regulated by processes and federal regulations and rules and guidelines that we need to follow. It requires a bidders committee to review and a scoring and selection process that results in contracts at the end, similar to what we just saw with the VOC and non-VOC folks. It's intended to re-procure the current service line, and it results in those end contracts, as we saw. A request for qualifications is a little different. What we're looking for this process is essentially a review of current existing providers to ensure that they are able and currently able and will be able to provide services to a level of quality and standard within their contract expectations and the expectations of that service line for OCHN. The process will require a qualifications committee who will evaluate providers' qualifications to meet those contractual obligations. There is a submission process for those providers who are currently providing those services contracted within the services within our network. And the process is basically associated with assuring the integrity of the network providers and the recontracting and reassignment of delegated functions back to OCHN, which will be the end result in this process. When we talk about meeting qualifications, just to provide a little bit of clarification around that, what we're looking for is to make sure that folks that are providing these services within our network have the infrastructure, have the licensing for specialized AFC to be able to provide it, have the staffing capabilities, training necessary, and so forth to be able to provide it. I'll get into a little bit more detail a little later in the talk here that I'll tell you a little bit about potential for exclusions and so forth. We're expected to release the request for qualifications at the end of this month or at the latest at the beginning of March. It's been important to share a little bit about some of the reasons for why we're doing this. Some of the providers and public community members and board members have asked us for why we're doing this, why we're making this change. And so we want to list those for you. Some of this you've heard me talk about when I presented on VOC and non-VOC services, and some of those reasons are similar. This has the potential to increase choice and opportunity for persons served. Some of the providers that we have in network, the direct service providers are currently contracted with only one core provider in some instances. This process would allow those service providers to then be available to the rest of the network. This increases the choice and opportunity for providers. Providers are then going to be available to the rest of the network, going to be then available to the rest of persons served within the network to be able to expand in that manner. This removes any potential inherent conflict of interest and moves in line with the direction of conflict-free case management, which is the direction the state has been talking about for some time. Now, to be clear, we're not speaking to say that our core providers are enacting in any type of conflict of interest, but by the nature of the current structure where a core provider is a contractor, a funder, and a service provider, and that nature, there is some potential for inherent conflict of interest. What this does is it makes us the contractor and the funder. It allows the core provider then to sustain as a service provider and focus as a support coordinator and the key advocate for that person served, and removes all of those other pieces. The other thing that does is it creates administrative efficiency with a single contract for the service providers and a single set of standards. Creates a single contact point and avoids any duplicative, unnecessary auditing by creating a situation where the audits would come through us. So some potential there. There is also some potential for administrative savings that could occur throughout this process, which of course can be reinvested back into the system. Relative to that part, and when we get a little bit later into the detail about any finance questions you may have, I think it's important to mention here that through this process, the intention would be to draw back any of the service line costs associated with specialized residential and community living support services. But we're going to be working with the core providers on a plan that allows us to create a good transition that's in line with them, that doesn't cripple them or create a situation where, damage to them as core providers, while we do look at the amount of administrative dollars that would return back that allows OCHN to properly provide those manage those delegated functions. So we have some meetings scheduled coming up with that, and I'll mention that in just a moment. Some additional talking points that I think are important for you to know. First off is that this isn't a process that should result in any change in services. This should be relatively unknown or unaware to the person served. This is administrative pieces that are going to be changing. Second to this is that all current contracted providers for these services within the OCHN network will have the opportunity to submit their submission. And barring any unusual circumstances, they'll have, all those contractors should be offered a contract with OCHN. So what would create an issue, or where a current contractor may not get a contract? Highly unlikely, but let's suppose through this process, we uncover that maybe a specialized AFC that is submitting a bid, for whatever reason, doesn't have a current license. It happens. I've seen it happen myself, where it's lapsed or something like that. Well, we can't contract that with them for that service if that license is not in place. The other parts that we've looked at is if there would happen to be some type of substantial issue around rights issues or other types of sentinel events that was never resolved or something like that, we may take that into account over the process. But overall, the intention is to look at current contracted providers in our network and transition those current contracted providers over to OCHN and contract them. So the fear for some of the providers out there that this will either end up as a loss of them being able to continue to contract with services with us should be decreased in knowing that. The other thing to know is that it's the intention of OCHN to take the best efforts to contract with these providers at their existing rates and revenue as much as possible. In other words, we don't expect or anticipate any rate or revenue changes as a result of this. We're going to try to bring them over into contract with us without hampering or reducing their rates. Going to try to keep them pretty as cost neutral. The other thing that's important for them to know is that there's no current service model change associated with this. This is basically the same type of funding model, the same type of funding as a per diem or as a fee for service for the CLS 15-minute unit should stay the same for them. Unlike the VOC, non-VOC piece, which we changed, this is going to be basically porting them over at the same type of reimbursement model. So some of these pieces, in advance of us sharing it with some of the providers, they were concerned. You know, I talked to a lot of the providers, have connections with them, and this has been very helpful. I've heard from a number of providers already that hearing some of this background and some of the plans we have has helped to quell some of their concerns. Ultimately, we will be working with some of the providers, just in line with what you've heard from Kathleen with her presentation, and you've heard us talk before. We are moving with all of our contracts in a direction with performance and outcome-based contracts and incentive-based models. And so at some point, we will be working with these service lines to try to develop a performance-based model or an incentive-based line for them, but not at this time. The other benefit, you know, that we feel at OCHN in making these steps is that ultimately, these are services, the direct services that we're accountable for through our contract through MDHHS. And by taking these steps and moving them closer to us and having this direct operation, we would be able to have closer touch with them, which we're ultimately accountable for. So with the credentialing, with the auditing, with the contract management piece, in addition to the other steps about the inherent conflicts of interest and so forth. So there's a number of points that we feel are positive, starting with the idea that this creates choice opportunity with persons served, because you know that's one of the key things that we're looking for. How does this better the lives and network that we work in, lives of persons served in the network? We have, important for you to know, we have created a communication plan. Christine Burke has worked with the S&T team, and overall this has been a pretty good team plan involving S&T, involving communications, involving FMB, involving senior leadership. The communication plan has already drawn out some talking points that it's put some of what I've just shared in a little bit more readable narrative, and that'll be put on our website and distributed to providers to give out to some of the family members. The other things that we've planned, we have a community forum that's scheduled. That's going to be set for March 28th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., and that's going to be held here at OCHN. We have 2 provider forums that are scheduled. Those are on March 26th and March 27th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., and that also is here at OCHN. And we have meetings scheduled with each individual core provider agency, and these are follow-ups from previous discussions we've had with them to discuss a coordinated plan. At the meetings, we'll be talking about the financial impact of these meetings, any transition planning and contingency planning for things that may happen if, say, a provider doesn't contract with us or whatever the case may be. The intention of those plans, and what I've already talked with some of the core providers directly, is to really say, hey, look, this is the process, what we're moving forward. Here's some of the figures, here's some of the plans. But let's hear what you have to say. What are your concerns? Let's talk about what processes you currently have in place, and let's create a shared plan where we work together and make this work for everybody. The intention isn't to cripple anybody or make a situation where, you know, it's creating fear, creating inability for them to continue to function. It really is just to try to move in a way where we can transition these services in a manner that OCHN can manage them effectively moving forward and allows them to continue to do their business in a successful manner as well. So looking forward to those discussions, and those will be within the next couple of weeks. Just as an additional note, we have had ongoing discussions about this. This is over a year in the making. We've had some discussions with some of the direct service providers as well, and have went to the Provider Alliance, had discussions, meetings with them, and I've had some meetings with some of the consumer-run committees, such as the CAC, and I made an error with the CERC, but it's actually Consumer Strategic Planning Work Group. Just to detail a little bit specific services requested through this RFQ. CLS Specialized Residential Services, which is H2016 code, and the Personal Care Service code, which is T1020. those two services packaged together that are for specialized adult foster care. Then the CLS per diem H001, H0043, that's the in-community CLS per diem rate, and then the CLS 15-minute unit, which is H2015. I also put a list here of the core providers that provide these services and that provide encounters and reporting for these services. You have those detailed there. And we wanted to provide some numbers associated with these services so that you can get a kind of a concept of overall providers and persons served associated with this. This was pulled today, the data here, and it's based off an encounter reporting, so it might be a few numbers off here and there, but not too substantially. We're going to hash this out a little closer when we meet with the providers individually and get to the get on the same line with them. This, as it stands currently, the core providers hold those contracts, and so getting on a finite number is going to be a little easier when we meet with them. But specialized residential, we're talking about 88 providers, about 1,440 people served. CLS services, approximately 55 providers, 2,461 persons served. Keep in mind that some of these providers provide a combination of specialized residential and CLS services. One question you may have is, why are we doing these service lines together, specialized AFC or specialized residential and the CLS services? Part of that was very much by the request and feedback from the providers when we met with them, because several of them, as you can see, do provide those services conjointly. Many of them are specialized AFC providers and a CLS staffing agency. They asked that the request for qualifications be released at the same time for both of those service lines. So we accommodated that request and are doing that conjointly. Total in our system are 278 homes, and a couple other last key points here that are important to know that through this process, because like I said, it's different than a standard RFP. With the RFQ, we have a little more control on this. We will not be adding any new homes to our network. Providers, if they have, provider X has 5 new homes, or 5 homes in their network, that's as many homes as they're going to be able to contract with us through the end result of this process. They can't add additional homes. Tying to that, any of the, we have the HCBS piece anyways that ties into this, and for the providers, because a lot of this really ties together, we've continued to provide supports around HCBS and continue to do that, although it doesn't directly tie to what's happening here with the RFQ process. On the provider side, and from their perspective, they're keenly aware of the potential impact for that. So we stand ready, are making good progress, and continue to work effectively with the providers through the HCBS process, and that's really going pretty well. Lastly, you see a chart, and that chart just provides a little bit of a data breakdown of the services. The first column is the specialized AFC services based on core provider, and the second column is the CLS per diem. That's again in the community independent per diem, and the third is the 15-minute unit CLS in the community independent. And again, numbers close, but those are ever changing, and when we meet with the core providers, we'll flesh out where we're on the same line exactly. That concludes the main information I had, but of course I want to answer any questions you may have about any of this.
Mrs. Summers.
I have a few, as you might expect.
Sure.
First, I just have a reaction to this. For a lot of people that I know and a lot of families I know, this is going to kind of be a double hit because they've just kind of gone through the growing pains of the voc and non-vocational changes and are still trying to get their equilibrium. And I know that there are a number of people who have family members that live in licensed environments. So I'm very concerned about how that communication happens and how we are perceived in this effort. I understand that it's not meant to save money, but people will go to that. But also, it's very disruptive. cases, the carpet's been tugged away a little bit, and now maybe it's all the way out. So I just want to express my concern that this be done well and thoroughly, and that the understanding is pretty complete, because it is on the heels of other changes that people are still kind of dealing with. Having that, I have a couple questions. Now, these qualifications came from where? The ones that you're going to use for the RFQ?
Yeah, the qualifications basically tie into things like scope of service for this based on the Medicaid manual for these lines of service. So when you look at CLS services, for example, they, reminding, prompting, assisting, managing of areas, grooming, hygiene, cooking, cleaning, and I could go on and on and on. So they're based on qualifications to be able to provide those services. You have to have a license in a specialized AFC, it has to be licensed in good accordance with LARA and so forth. So you look at those kind of things, scope of service, a license for any licensed services. Do they have the infrastructure? Do they have the staffing? Do they have a history of providing this service to success, and things like that?
Other question I had is, in terms of conflict-free case management, are you saying that by bringing the oversight, the management internally, that the core providers will have, the supports coordination provided by the core providers will remove the conflict? Is that?
By OCHN direct contracting here, it removes some inherent conflicts of interest that are set up with the way that the current system is, such that the core providers are the contractor, the funder, the case manager, support coordinator, and in some cases, the trainer of those providers. So, like I said, we're not here to say that they're enacting on those conflicts, but they're built in inherently. Examples, when a person needs a higher level of care, such as they may be being assessed for a specialized AFC that's a higher cost service, does that get considered in any way to the overall budgets of the organization? That gets removed from the dynamic here because we are assuming those costs. The support coordinator in that case can enact on the best interest of that person without considering the overall organizational costs. They can say, what does John Smith need? Now, we assume that occurs already, and it should, but this clears that out as any potential for cost, being an issue. Sometimes we...
Creating the centers kind of decision-making, one aspect of addressing conflict-free.
Yeah. So, another example that the state has come to us about is they've said, hey, and again, one of those instances we're not saying occurs, but they've said, we've heard from other PIHPs that sometimes providers, and it wasn't even specific to me, I was speaking with one of the MDHHS representatives about a dynamic they talked about with other PIHPs actually, where some of the PIHPs, the CMHs would, providers would try to move folks to the state facility because the cost is associated with the MDHS now, not the PIHPs, rather than looking at less restrictive community settings. This takes that out of the play too. So it's, again, removing them as the funding source for anything like that, putting them as a pure advocate for that person and that person in that person's corner. Costs are associated with us on those service lines, and they can advocate in the best interest of that person served without that being an issue or part of the equation.
That improve the opportunity for independent support coordination in this environment. I mean, the good news is that people don't want to change supports coordinators, so then that isn't going to be an aspect that's going to be necessary for them. So that's great. But are we also going to look at just the whole concept of independent supports coordination, maybe not attached to a core provider other than through contract?
Something we've talked about it is moving in the direction of having conflict-free case management. And, we always have on the table self-determination where people can move in that direction and get their own independent support coordinator, case manager. One thing we certainly want to do is move in the direction on the MI side. We don't see that that's really utilized very much on the MI side.
An opportunity.
Right.
My last question is, it says there's the potential for administrative savings. I didn't quite understand how that would play out.
I'll make a note, I'll mention something, perhaps even Anya may have more to add to it, but So what gets passed through are service line dollars that go through the core providers, and that goes to direct service providers. Those dollars would be coming back to us in order to continue to pay the direct service providers for these service lines. No reductions or anything like that there. There's also administrative dollars that go through the core providers that help them to administer and manage the contracts in these providers. Now, some of those dollars would need to come back to us in order to help us now manage those functions. How much of that is something that's going to be determined based on the discussions that we have with the core providers when we meet with them individually. We want to do that in a collaborative way that shows respect to their concerns around how that may impact them as an organization. So our overall intention is to say, hey, we're coming to the table with you, and these are the numbers that we see. Overall, we just want to be able to manage this function and be able to create fairness around how those dollars come back and make it a process where it works for everybody and that you're not going to be crippled by this and that you're going to continue your functions. As I know it, some of the core providers have taken steps to already try to mitigate this issue from being a major impact for them. I'll add one more comment if I could, just respectful to your initial comment about ensuring this gets rolled out well. I think there were some lessons learned out of the non-voc-voc process. The non-voc-voc process was a more substantial change, not in and of the size and the amount of providers, because this obviously is more substantial in the amount of providers, but this was a case model change, it was a rate change, and that was a significant part of this. This also offered it was an RFP process that offered an opportunity for new providers outside the system, which created a little bit of dynamic. My conversations with providers so far, and I've had it with many so far, it really has provided a lot of calming to their concerns to know that this is only going to be open to providers who currently contract in our system, and those current contracted providers will have opportunities for the contract. We're not trying to eliminate providers. We're not trying to bring in new providers or new homes. The other thing that's really helped them is knowing that there's not a service model attached to this or any changes like that that are significant. The third thing is knowing that we're going to do our best with the intent to try to maintain their rates and their revenue relative to their current standing. So even just today I talked with a representative of Provider Alliance, and they were saying they're hearing good things. People are calming about this. And certainly though, we do want to get information out to the families. We don't want them to be concerned. I have heard also, sometimes I talk to some of the family members. I've had a couple reach out to me. Once I've explained some of that, it quells a lot of their concerns. Christine Burke has a detailed, much more than I got into here, but a detailed plan to get those communications out where they get to the providers, they get on our website, providers distribute those to the families, and we're hopeful that that will help. We have the community forum that's inviting folks and families, persons served. We'll talk about it then. And the intention is to be very transparent and open and answer questions until there aren't any.
You sure, Judy? No more?
I just think that you have to be aware about how raw feelings still are. I think you just have to take that into consideration when it comes to the information out. How providers react is very important to me, but how families feel is 100 times more important to me. And I just think that if we don't give them at least the opportunity to be upset, and then provide some information, I think it really will make a big difference on how people will see things. I think that things have been kind of calm for a long time. Changes started happening. This sounds like another change potentially, which may or may not actually come through. And so I just am very worried about that. And I want it to be well done, because if we're trying to do the right thing the right way, then that's what matters. And if there's stability going forward, that's fabulous. But I really do think that we have to pay very close attention to how we do that.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm respectful of that. I think some of you heard me say before, what I have found with the years of working in different system changes is when change happens, a lot of times people perceive change with the likelihood of loss and instead of opportunity. And we're hopeful through our communications and hearing, respecting their concerns, trying to provide them opportunities to talk about that and providing clear communication so that they understand our plans and they feel like they're part of it and they can see how this is going to be better, being open with those discussions. Hopefully they can then instead see the change as opportunities. And that's where we're
Good
moving
for
towards.
evil, everybody's aware of the uncertainty of funding. So it's hard sometimes to accept the information for what it is without kind of going about the money. So that's my
Thank you.
end of sermon.
Are you sure?
End of sermon.
Anyone else questions? Mr. Landsman?
I have a couple questions. So this sounds like it's a transition. Providers have managed we're going to manage those. I know that's not new for like the substance use folks. They've been doing they managed their network for years. Does have its challenges. What is the feedback you've gotten from the core providers? Because it sounds like now they'll just be doing case management.
Yeah, so it's, to answer your first part, Jonathan, it is a change in delegated functions, but it does result in a recontracting process that, again, it reassures us the integrity and qualities and qualifications of those providers in the network. But you're right, you said it much quicker than I did. The feedback from the core providers so far, we've had a couple of meetings with them. The first one was about a year ago or so, give or take. There was concerns about it. I think some of the first concerns were around, hey, you guys going to be able to do this? You guys know what you're doing with this? We talked with them. I remember some of those conversations pretty clearly. I did some of this in Macomb County, some of these same transitions, and not in the nature of a core provider agency taking those back, but I'm very familiar with these lines of services, so we had some pretty good discussions. Ultimately, what I appreciated about some of those discussions was the core providers shared they want to make sure that these services are going to be cared for properly and that they're going to be moving forward with the ability to provide good quality services. So they want to ensure that we're going to be able to do that. So I think, and the other part, of course, is the concern around the financial impact for them that could occur. And so with those two things in mind, leading into our discussion in the upcoming meetings with them, those are two key areas I want to focus on, is assuring them of our plan and how we're going to be managing this effectively moving forward, and then talk to them about any concerns they have, and create as much as possible a shared transition plan that involves their concerns, their input, and information for them that helps us as well through this process. So
It occurred to me that for the direct providers, this might faster than we pay the core providers. The core providers don't know if that is a reality. Don't know that waterfall process, if you will, but it occurred to me that that's.
And I can't speak for the payment process for all the providers. I do know that at least one of our providers pays their providers very quickly. And so in this instance, they're saying, we want to make sure you're going to provide them quickly. Some of them may not be as quickly, I don't know. But overall, we'll work with providers to make sure we're paying in a way that still sustains them, make sure that they don't have any hiccups and so forth. I think, though, that aside, there are a lot of benefits to the providers here, the direct service providers here, because of, like I said, they have now one single contract to follow, one set of standards, one contract point person, one set of audits instead of multiple core providers are auditing them. They have a lot of clarity around that. They have opportunity to engage the rest of the network and to engage folks. If they were with Easter Seals, now they can engage persons served from CNS and TTI and so forth.
So that takes me to the next question. You identified 109 direct providers that would have an opportunity to under the RFQ. But you're not allowing for any new potential vendors, and you're not allowing the existing ones to expand the number of sites that they could deliver. A lot of them might not be in the business. What happens if some of them don't?
Through some of the things we've been doing and tying again back to Kathleen's report with her strategic plan and so forth, we've been working on building out a provider directory, which has included contacting our providers within the network and ensuring we have key contact points and so forth. The intention will be to turn over every stone, make sure we have every contact, and I really try to make sure we do that. We had, for the non-voc-voc process, for example, we did have a couple instances where providers approached us after the bids had closed and said, hey, we never received anything. And we did a review of our documents and saw we had made some contacts we believe that had made some contacts, but we worked with them and found that, maybe there was some other things that could have happened, maybe right email wrong, whatever it may be. And we worked it out in a way that we still felt held integrity to the RFP process. We have the ability to do that sort of thing. End of the day, we have no intention of leaving providers out there, especially there's risk when you leave an existing provider out there that's providing services to people we serve and not allowing them to have fair opportunity through this. And so we don't want to create that kind of dynamic.
Just aware that there are some that are business is to deliver, not good at being non-responsive. Either they do a poor job at it and you throw them out, or they don't respond at all. And then the last question I have is removing the delegation and bringing it in-house. How many additional resources are we going to hire to manage this additional 100 or so vendors?
I'll answer the first part too, because I want to provide some information that would be helpful. We started talking about this, like I said, a little over a year ago, and I've had meetings with some of the direct service providers, and I did have, it wasn't many, but I had a few come up at times and say, I don't know how to do this. I haven't done it in 15 years, or I've never done it. The person that used to have my position did it. And we did have some discussions. I connected them with a couple folks, said, hey, when you get to this process, you have some colleagues here that'll talk with you. Connected them with Provider Alliance, Bob Stein, Mala, and so forth. The other thing is that this isn't a request for proposal, it's a request for qualifications, so it's more streamlined. It doesn't have the full breadth of what an RFP or the full amount of work that an RFP would have. It's a little cleaner, a little streamlined. So a lot of the questions are more so, do you have your specialized AFC license? Yes. Can you provide a copy of it? Yes. So it's not as in-depth as you might find for an RFP. So it's geared more to help with that issue. Still, there's some work involved. So with the providers that I've been talking to, including going to Provider Alliance a few times actually, and in some of the provider meetings I've been saying, hey, this is coming out, this is going to come out, months in advance. Start collecting your, your tax forms, start collecting your license forms, start putting them in a file just to keep them aside so you have this in advance so you're not chasing it around last minute. So between guiding them to get some help from their peers, guiding them in a way to find resources to help them with this, and you can also, not that we prefer it, but people can pay people to help them with this process as well. I think they have some sufficient resources. But overall, the process of this isn't like an RFP, which, as you probably know, you get a good review, it doesn't always reflect the services. This is about, can you provide the service, are you qualified, and do you meet the standards? So, Art, you had asked about staffing, right, and how many. We've done some organizational meetings to look at what this is like. We are sensitive to the idea of adding on, and so forth. But there are some necessary functions associated with these delegated functions that we have to account for that can't be accounted for by existing staff. It's not as many as you might think. But there are some auditing functions. There are some budget and finance folks with billing. There will likely be a contract person that will need to assist with some of the additional contracts. And there'll be an S&T, at least one S&T staff that will have to assist with the management of transfers and placements and so forth, and coordinating with support coordination agencies when people want to leave a home or get kicked out of a home or whatever it may be, things like discharge, I shouldn't say that, but discharged. So it's, I don't have exact calculations with me in front of you, but there are a handful or a few staff. I estimate 5, 6 off the top of my hand. But again, the amount of administrative dollars well exceeds the ability to cover those costs. So, and the amount of staff that are currently in the network that cover those functions well exceeds what we would be taking in to be able to manage those functions internally.
We might borrow some of the folks from those spots internally with those.
I believe the stance would be that we would be posting those positions and provide fair opportunity for anybody rather than try to take staff from any agency. Again, this is really, those pieces that we're talking about are really contingent on the discussions with the providers, and that's really the critical part for us. I really want to go into those meetings with them to help them understand. We want to work with them on a transition plan that's successful for them, that doesn't create fear, that lets them know at the end of the day, we're going to come out of this together. You're going to be able to continue to function in a manner that works successfully for you. We're just trying to manage these functions successfully internally as well. So more to come on that, but excellent questions.
Any final questions for Matt? Thank you very much, Matt. We appreciate
Thank you, everybody.
Mr. Landsman, do you have a report for the Recipient Rights Advisory Committee?
Well, actually, I have two because we didn't meet last month, but they're relatively brief. Recipient Rights Advisory Committee report from January 4th. We met it on the 4th at 5:30. The facilitator was Paul Pallas. Jean, the manager of Recipient Rights, provided the following updates: that their focus was on the move to the new building. They're moving 3 years or 6 cabinets of records to the new building. Obviously, they've made it here. Everything else is being scanned. Let's see, they were preparing the annual fiscal year 17 recipient rights report to the state. We saw the presentation tonight. So folks had started in and out, and at the time were being trained and mentored. So working full time. Vicki Suter provided the following updates: that the 2 new RRAC members on our board had been through the training. She shared a press release with the new building. This is really dated stuff. Let's see. We're making preparations, or at least planning, for the on-site state assessment, which is scheduled for September 24th through the 28th. This is something that happens on-site once every 3 years. That's the first report. The second one is from February 1st. This time the facilitator was Priscilla Williams. Lee Brown presented the finances, our budget for this coming year. Recipient rights budget actually increased by about 11%. So it's sort of interesting. So we're focused more on the education, more on investigations, et cetera. We had a number of people leave the board or would be leaving the board, and we did internal interviews in closed session. You saw the results of that tonight, where we had 2 people up for renewal. We had 4 people up to fill vacancies. At this point, through the end of January, we'd covered approximately 42% of the sites that have to have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Ms. Schulman, who's our liaison to the Consumer Advisory Committee, could not be with us tonight. I just received her report via technology, so I'm going to read excerpts from it. The CAC voted to cancel their January meeting due to the move into the new building, and their February meeting will be held here in the new building. The CAC Bylaws Subcommittee, charged with the review of the CAC bylaws, is looking forward to submitting a hard copy of advised changes by the February CAC meeting. The CAC elected Anita Warner, representing My Place Center for Wellness, chairperson of the CAC for 2018, and Ursula Bolton, representing Easter Seals family, vice chairperson of the CAC. Director Willie Brooks spoke from his director's report, Government of the People, by the People, for the People. His theme was to inspire hope as if people's lives depend on it, for in reality, they truly do. Chairperson Glenda Vidash, representing Oakland Family Services, ended her term serving as CAC chairperson with a heartfelt and grateful thank you for the opportunity to have served as chairperson of the CAC for 2017. And the next meeting of the CAC will be Wednesday, February 21st, 2018 at 9:30, and that's respectfully submitted by Lois Schulman, board liaison. Are there any questions? Yes. Okay.
Question, but I've been asked to take anti-stigma to CAC, so I'll be able to do a report in Lois's absence of tomorrow's meeting, because I'll be there.
Okay, very good. Next, Dr. Klotz.
Yes, thank you. First item, I have 4 items. The first item is GAINS assessment. GAINS stands for Global Appraisal of Individual Needs of Our Substance Use Disorder Recipients. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, MDHHS, is mandating that all publicly funded substance use disorder service recipients undergo the GAIN 1 core assessment beginning October 1st, 2018. This plan is to begin with providers conducting this lengthy assessment every 90 days. It is also the intention that once this mandate is rolled out with providers, MDHHS will require all prepaid inpatient health plans to utilize the GAIN screening tool. As I indicated earlier, GAIN stands for the Global Appraisal of Individual Needs of Substance Abuse Recipients. The GAIN is a series of measures designed to integrate research and clinical assessment. With 99 scales and subscales, it is designed to measure the recency, the breadth, the frequency of problems, and the service utilization related to substance use, including diagnosis, course of treatment, motivation, and relapse potential. There's other items, but it's a very comprehensive survey of each individual. It also measures physical health, risk protective involvement, mental health environment, and vocational situations. The GAIN Substance Problem Index, SPI, is a dimensional measure of problem severity for the participant's lifetime, past year, and past month. It can also be used to measure change over time and to categorize participants in terms of their abuse, their dependence, and course specifiers. It can also be used to break out problems, diagnoses by substance. The substance use disorder directors from the 10 PIHPs are particularly concerned about the impending rollout. The assessment is 60 pages long and does not contain relevant data that must be captured and reported to the federal government. This will result in people having to undergo cumbersome, lengthy assessment process to receive services and repeat this process every 90 days. Capturing data is important and it assists in making treatment decisions. It is important that this tool does not negatively impact the people we serve. There'll be other issues which will have implementation. This remains the largest concern to SUD directors. I know historically when our recipients know they're going to have to do a survey and it's going to be long and whatever, for a number of people it creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and a lot of resistance. And the first thing they want to say is no. So I wish our staff well in their attempt to do this every 90 days. It's going to be monumental, but we're going into it with a positive attitude. The next item is Jail Medication Assisted Treatment Program. Oakland Community Health Network is partnered with the Oakland County Sheriff's Department and Sacred Heart Rehabilitation to provide medication-assisted treatment, usually Oakland County Jail. This project is part of an ongoing effort to better equip offenders who have previously abused and are addicted to opioids have a safer transition back into their communities. This is a pilot program. Additional details and information will be available once the program is scheduled for a start date. I think I understand, Christina, that actually started today, did it? Well, last Monday. Okay, so we're rolling on that program. We'll be the first in Michigan. We are the first in Michigan to have such a program. Unfortunately, there's a high degree of overdoses of prisoners leaving jail. 95% of former inmates do not follow their treatment recommendations. It takes about 2 years to recover from opiate addiction. And what happens is the people, they know what their level of usage was before they were incarcerated. So a lot of them think they can go back to the previous doses that they were using before, only to find that they overdosed and perhaps die in their effort to use their previous drug of choice. So that obviously will be part of the education and the working with people while they're in the jail to understand that phenomenon. State Drug Treatment Court Advisory Committee. The criminal justice system and individuals with substance use disorders often go hand in hand. For this reason, treatment courts take on a vital role. It played important of recovery. Evidence continually shows that we cannot arrest or incarcerate individuals. Believe that this will address the issue and is important that we continue to be involved in assisting and providing the most current information about best practices in treatment to allow for success of those involved in the program. OCHN will not only be involved at the local level, but now at the state level as well. We're proud to announce that Christina Nicholas, Administrator of our Substance Abuse Services, was appointed by the legislature of the State Drug Treatment Court Advisory Committee, and the state committee is the foundation for addressing change in the system. It is very important and exciting to continue to impact change at the state level, and congratulations, Christina. Finally, Narcan. I just want to say that Narcan is well and running in terms of administration and training, and continues to go very well. Citizens in the community are actively being trained to use this medication, and it continues to emphasize that the administration of Narcan is safe and saves lives. I learned from Christina that initially the doses that they were suggesting for Narcan, the administration of Narcan, some agencies were concerned that it might have been too high. So those initial doses of Narcan were reduced to, I think it was half the amount, and then they found it was too low. So then they asked that it go back to the original dosage. What's interesting is that if a person does not respond to the first, second, maybe even third administration of Narcan, they can be given additional doses, either in the EMS unit on the site or at the hospital. So that's my report, respectfully submitted.
Thank you, Dr. Klotz. Are there any questions? Okay. Mr. Brooks, I was going to say, do you have a director's report?
As it's being passed around, again, I just want to thank the board for allowing me to serve. You will definitely see a lot of me in the future. I won't be that far away. 75 South. Hope you have a copy. I will start. Thank you for toiling the entire day. I know it's been a long meeting with so much to cover. I promise this will not be painful. Dignity and respect. Dignity and respect are crucial to building and sustaining an environment in which everyone feels included, valued, and appreciated. Leave a lasting impression. People do not always remember what is said to them. They usually remember how the words or actions of others made them feel. During my nearly 6 years tenure at Oakland Community Health Network, I've strived to ensure that my interactions with the people we serve, providers, community partners, and legislators, made them feel respected and that they had been treated with quality and dignity. The importance of dignity and respect is much more than how others view the people involved in community mental health. It also involves how the people in community mental health view themselves. Following the 7 pillars of dignity and respect. In 2008, a grassroots initiative called the Dignity and Respect Campaign was launched to support communities, organizations, youth programs, schools, and sport teams in making the world a better place for all to live with all of our differences. The program introduced 30 tips for practicing how to show dignity and respect towards others. Each of these tips were then categorized under 7 pillars that people are encouraged to follow in their daily lives. As I read these wise words, I felt inspired to share them with our network so that as a group we can collectively end stigma through acts of dignity and respect. Start with you. Not only should we examine how we treat those around us, but we should also look at how we are treated and expect to be treated by other people. Unfortunately, my first experience with the public mental health system was that the people we serve and the staff who served them felt that because their services and salaries were funded by Medicaid, they deserved less than the general public. My immediate response to this ideal, not true. We are all valued members of our community. We are friends, family members, neighbors, and coworkers. We are individuals who deserve and have a right to be treated with dignity and respect at all times. Small stuff. Small gestures and words of kindness have a profound and positive impact on people. Greeting people with a smile makes them feel welcome. Asking how they are doing makes people feel that someone cares. Listening tells someone that what they say and think actually matters. These actions may seem small in regard to effort, but they are most definitely giant in terms of showing dignity and respect to the people we serve. Build cultural awareness. Cultural awareness describes an understanding of the differences between the people from other countries or backgrounds, especially differences in attitudes and values. Building awareness is necessary to achieve cultural sensitivity. Through cultural sensitivity, we learn to recognize the difference and similarities that exist between people without assigning them a value, positive or negative, better or worse, right or wrong. Find common ground. The beliefs and opinions of individuals are often shaped by their life experiences, what they have heard, what they have seen. This is also true for those of us engaged in the public mental health system. Robust discussions around service delivery, physical responsibility, and transparency often position us in a different camps. And yet, no matter how far apart we appear on any topic, we manage to work through our differences with dignity and respect. We do this finding common ground in order to protect and promote public mental health services for our country's most vulnerable citizens. Lead the way. Our community looks to us to lead them in ensuring people with disabilities are afforded the same life opportunities as those without disabilities. Their expectation is that we provide innovative service programs that help the people we serve achieve inclusion, recovery, independence, and self-determination. As leaders, we are helping to build stronger neighborhoods and cities that recognize the abilities of those who have disabilities. Do the right thing. One of the greatest privileges of my career has been to serve as Executive Director and CEO of Oakland Community Health Network. Whether visiting a clubhouse, day program, or attending a CAC meeting, I have been surrounded by extraordinary people who choose to do the right thing for others every single day. They speak up as advocates, they offer support to peers, they work countless hours so that people with intellectual and developmental disability, mental illness, or substance use disorder can achieve their life ambitions and dreams. They believe that being treated with dignity and respect is the rule and not the exception for Oakland County public mental health system. Finally, leaving behind. Although I am now preparing to leave Oakland Community Health Network, I am also leaving behind my impressions of dignity and respect that can be carried in well past my departure. I'm leaving with you my personal visits to staff, provided nearly every day, to reassure each member that they are indeed special to me and the people we serve. And I'm leaving behind a workplace that is one of the most technologically advanced settings in the country. I am leaving behind a workforce of some of the most talented individuals in the state. I'm leaving behind buildings to work in that were designed to amplify dignity and respect, and to remind everyone that they are indeed special each day. I'm leaving behind people we serve who deserve the best. But most of all, I'm leaving behind a piece of my heart that as you walk through the building will generate dignity and respect each day, because you know I will always care. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. We do not have other business, so it is now our second opportunity for public comment. Would anybody like to make public comment? Oh, I guess everybody's tired. And did you have director comments? I think you did a good job. Are there any board member comments? Yes, Mr. Landsman.
As a board member, I have a fiduciary responsibility. That's why I ask a lot of questions from both a financial and a policy operations perspective. I'm always concerned about us doing the right thing, and as well ensuring that we have transparency, and I worry about the optics. While we've had some talk about replacing our CEO, first this fall, Willie, when they tried to steal you then, and now this winter, the consensus seems to be that we need to follow a well-defined process. Some members of our board have expressed that if it takes us a number of months to find and select the right person, then so be it, as we have a lot riding on this selection for our future. I'm a Trekkie, so I would paraphrase it as this: to seek out candidates to help us go where no CMH PIHP has. I trust we will, as we have in the past, continue to do the right thing the right way, but I am concerned about the speed we're going through with the approach of rushing towards a new CEO. The state, local leadership, but more importantly, the folks we serve are watching our every move. I am concerned. I remember when we chose Willie to transition from CFO to CEO. We spent more than 3 months convincing everyone that a financially focused CEO had the compassion to serve our populations. He has proven that he has that passion and the compassion. Today I received a fair amount of public feedback about the 2 upcoming interview sessions that seem to materialize over the weekend. It gives the impression or the appearance that we don't want public involvement, and I know that's not the case. But I want to ensure that we meet the Open Meetings Act, the regulation, whatever it is, but to do so both in the letter and in the spirit of the law. Dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Landsman. Would anybody else like to make comment? I just want to say we're going to miss you, Mr. Brooks, and we wish you the best at Detroit Wayne. And I'm sure we can find somebody to fill your shoes, and we're going to do our best to do that. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
That was a lot. It's hard for you too, because then you all